A widowed millionaire hired a homeless woman to care for his triplets. One day, arriving home early from work, he broke into tears upon seeing what the new nanny had done to his daughters. The sprawling mansion on Willow Creek Drive stood as a monument to wealth and success, its manicured lawns and gleaming windows a testament to the prosperity of its owner. Yet for all its grandeur, an eerie silence permeated the halls, broken only by the occasional patter of small feet or the hushed whispers of the staff. Alexander Blackwood, the mansion's owner and one of the city's most successful entrepreneurs, sat in his study, surrounded by stacks of papers and glowing computer screens. His steel-grey eyes, once bright with ambition, now carried a perpetual weariness that no amount of success could dispel. At 42, he had achieved more than most could dream of, but the cost had been steep. As he pored over the latest financial reports, a soft knock on the door interrupted his concentration. "Come in," he called out, his voice carrying a hint of impatience. Mrs. Hendricks, the housekeeper, stepped into the room, her weathered face set in a look of concern. "Mr. Blackwood, I'm sorry to disturb you, but it's about the girls. They're asking for you again." Alexander's jaw tightened, a flicker of guilt passing across his face, before he masked it with practiced indifference. "I'm in the middle of something important, Mrs. Hendricks. Can't you handle it?" The housekeeper's lips pressed into a thin line, disapproval evident in her eyes. "With all due respect, sir, I'm not their father. They need you." Her words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken reproach. Alexander turned to look out the window, his reflection superimposed over the view of the garden where three little girls played. His daughters, Lily, Rose, and Violet, were a vibrant splash of color against the perfectly manicured landscape, their giggles barely audible through the thick glass. For a moment, he allowed himself to really look at them. At 5 years old, they were mirror images of each other, with golden curls and bright blue eyes that reminded him painfully of their mother, Sophia. The wound of her loss, even after 2 years, still felt raw and unbearable. "I'll be down in a few minutes," he finally said, his voice softer than before. Mrs. Hendricks nodded and left, closing the door behind her. Alexander stood, straightening his impeccably tailored suit. He moved to a small bar in the corner of the study and poured himself a finger of whiskey, downing it in one swift motion. The burn in his throat was a welcome distraction from the ache in his chest. As he made his way downstairs, the sound of laughter grew louder. He paused at the French doors leading to the garden, watching as his daughters chased each other around a marble fountain. They were beautiful, perfect, and utterly foreign to him. Since Sophia's passing, he had buried himself in work, leaving the day-to-day care of the girls to the staff. It was easier that way, or so he told himself. Easier than facing the overwhelming grief and responsibility of raising 3 children alone. Taking a deep breath, Alexander pushed open the doors and stepped out into the sunlight. The girls stopped their game, turning to look at him with a mixture of surprise and hesitation that made his heart constrict. "Daddy!" Lily, always the boldest, ran towards him. She stopped short of hugging him, uncertainty clear in her eyes. "Are you coming to play with us?" Alexander forced a smile, kneeling down to her level. "I thought I might join you for a little while. What game are you playing?" Rose and Violet approached cautiously, exchanging glances. "We're pretending to be explorers," Rose explained, her voice soft. "We're looking for treasure." "Treasure, Alexander said, trying to infuse enthusiasm into his voice. "And have you found any yet?" Violet, the quietest of the three, shook her head. "We need a map," she whispered, glancing up at him hopefully. For a moment, Alexander was at a loss. He couldn't remember the last time he had played make-believe, but looking at their expectant faces, he felt a spark of something long dormant, a desire to connect, to be the father they needed. "Well then," he said, clearing his throat, "I suppose we'll have to make one. Who wants to help me draw a treasure map?" The girls' faces lit up, their excitement palpable. As they rushed to gather paper and crayons, Alexander felt a twinge of regret for all the moments he had missed. But mixed with that regret was a glimmer of hope. Perhaps it wasn't too late to change, to build the kind of relationship with his daughters that Sophia would have wanted. As they spread out on the grass, Alexander awkwardly began to sketch out a rudimentary map of the garden. The girls crowded around him, offering suggestions and giggling at his attempts to draw trees and bushes. For the first time in months, he found himself genuinely smiling, but the moment was short-lived. His phone buzzed insistently in his pocket, and the smile faded from his face. The girls noticed the change immediately, their own smiles faltering. "You have to go, don't you, Daddy?" Lily asked, her voice small and resigned. Alexander hesitated, torn between the demands of his business and the pleading looks on his daughters' faces. In that moment, he realized with startling clarity that something had to change. He couldn't continue to be a ghost in his own home, a stranger to his own children. "No," he said finally, turning off his phone. "No, I don't have to go. The treasure won't find itself, will it?" The girls' eyes widened in surprise and delight. As they resumed their game with renewed enthusiasm, Alexander felt a weight lift from his shoulders. It was a small step, but an important one. As the afternoon wore on, Alexander found himself relaxing, drawn into the simple joy of his daughter's imaginations. But even as he played along, a nagging thought persisted in the back of his mind. He knew that this one afternoon wouldn't be enough. The girls needed more than he could give while juggling the demands of his empire. They needed a mother's touch, a nurturing presence that could fill the void left by Sophia's passing. As much as it pained him to admit it, Alexander knew he needed help. He needed someone who could not only care for the girls, but also bring warmth back into their lives. Warmth that he, in his grief and emotional distance, had been unable to provide. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the garden, Alexander made a decision. It was time to find a nanny, someone who could give the girls the attention and care they deserved. Little did he know that this decision would set in motion a chain of events that would change all of their lives forever. The laughter of his daughters echoed through the garden, a sound that had been all too rare in recent months. Alexander allowed himself a moment to savor it, to memorize the sight of their smiling faces. Tomorrow, he would return to the world of boardrooms and business deals. But for now, he was simply a father, rediscovering the joy of his children's company. As they made their way back to the house, the girls chattering excitedly about their adventure, Alexander felt a mix of emotions wash over him. Guilt for the time he had lost, hope for the future, and a fierce determination to do better. The mansion that had felt so cold and empty for so long suddenly seemed a little warmer, a little more like home. But as he tucked the girls into bed that night, reading them a story for the first time in months, Alexander knew that this was just the beginning. The road ahead would be challenging, filled with ups and downs, as he learned to balance his work with the needs of his family. But looking at the peaceful faces of his sleeping daughters, he knew it was a challenge he had to accept. With a gentle kiss on each forehead, Alexander whispered a promise to them and to himself. "Things are going to be different," he said softly. "I promise." As he closed the door to their room, the weight of that promise settled on his shoulders. He had no idea how he would keep it, but he knew he had to try. For Sophia's memory, for his daughter's future, and for his own salvation. The search for a nanny would begin tomorrow, but little did Alexander know that fate had already set the wheels in motion. The person who would change their lives was closer than he could have ever imagined, waiting just around the corner in the most unlikely of places. The following morning dawned bright and clear, but Alexander Blackwood's mind was far from the pristine blue sky outside his office window. He sat at his desk, phone pressed to his ear, listening to the droning voice of his assistant as she read off a list of potential nanny agencies. "Mr. Blackwood, are you still there?" The voice on the other end of the line pulled him back to the present. "Yes, Jessica, I'm here," he replied, pinching the bridge of his nose. "Schedule interviews with the top 3 agencies for next week, and make sure they understand the unique nature of our situation." After hanging up, Alexander leaned back in his chair, his gaze falling on a framed photograph on his desk. It was a picture of Sophia, taken just weeks before the accident that claimed her. Her smile, radiant and full of life, seemed to mock him now. How had he let things get so out of hand? How had he become so disconnected from the 3 little girls who needed him most? Shaking off the melancholy thoughts, Alexander gathered his things and headed out. He had a meeting across town, and the morning traffic was already building. As he navigated the busy streets, his mind wandered back to the previous evening. The sound of his daughter's laughter, the feel of their small hands in his as they explored the garden. It had awakened something in him, a longing for connection that he had suppressed for far too long. Lost in thought, he almost missed his turn. Cursing under his breath, he pulled into a small parking lot beside a quaint coffee shop. He needed caffeine if he was going to make it through this meeting. The line inside the coffee shop was long, filled with the usual mix of hurried business people and leisurely locals. Alexander tapped his foot impatiently, checking his watch every few seconds. When he finally reached the counter, he rattled off his order, a large black coffee, no room for cream. As he waited for his drink, a commotion near the door caught his attention. A small boy, no more than 4 or 5, was crying loudly, his face red and streaked with tears. "Mommy!" he wailed, looking around frantically. "I want my mommy!" The other patrons shifted uncomfortably, some shooting annoyed glances at the child, others studiously ignoring the scene. Alexander felt a pang of sympathy, remembering times when his own girls had been overwhelmed in public places. Just as he was considering approaching the boy, a figure swept past him. A woman, her clothes worn and mismatched, knelt beside the crying child. "Hey there, little one," she said, her voice gentle and soothing. "Are you lost?" The boy nodded, hiccuping through his tears. The woman smiled, her eyes kind despite the tired lines etched around them. "It's okay. We'll find your mommy together. Can you tell me what she looks like?" As Alexander watched transfixed, the woman patiently coaxed information from the boy. Her demeanor was calm and reassuring, a stark contrast to her disheveled appearance. Within minutes, she had not only calmed the child, but had also managed to locate his frantic mother, who had been searching the neighboring shops. The reunion was tearful and joyous, the mother profusely thanking the woman who had helped her son. But as quickly as she had appeared, the woman slipped away, melting back into the bustle of the coffee shop. Alexander found himself moving before he even realized it, following the woman as she made her way to the door. "Excuse me," he called out, causing her to turn. Up close, he could see the toll that hard times had taken on her. Her clothes were clean but threadbare, her shoes worn at the edges. Yet there was a dignity in the way she held herself, a spark of intelligence in her eyes that belied her circumstances. "That was impressive," Alexander said, fumbling for words. "The way you handled that situation with the boy." The woman shrugged, a small sad smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Children just need patience and understanding. Sometimes that's all any of us need." Something about her words, about the gentle wisdom in her voice, struck a chord in Alexander. Before he could second-guess himself, he blurted out, "Do you have experience with children?" A flicker of pain crossed her face, there and gone so quickly he almost missed it. "I used to be a teacher," she said softly. Before life took an unexpected turn." Alexander's mind was racing. He knew what he was considering was unconventional, possibly even reckless, but he couldn't shake the image of this woman comforting the lost boy, couldn't ignore the instinct that told him she might be exactly what his family needed. "I have a proposition for you," he said, his voice low and urgent. "It's unconventional and you'd be well within your rights to refuse, but I'd like you to hear me out." The woman's eyes narrowed slightly, a mix of curiosity and wariness in her gaze. "I'm listening," she said cautiously. Alexander took a deep breath. "I'm looking for someone to help care for my daughters. 3 of them, triplets. They're 5 years old and they need more than I've been able to give them lately." He watched as understanding dawned in her eyes, followed quickly by disbelief. Are you offering me a job? As a nanny?" "I know how this must sound," Alexander said quickly. "But I saw how you were with that boy. You have a gift, and my girls, they need someone like you in their lives." The woman took a step back, shaking her head. "You don't know anything about me. I'm not exactly in the best position right now, as you can probably tell." Alexander nodded, acknowledging the obvious. "I know it's unusual, but I'm willing to provide everything you'd need, room, board, clothes, whatever's necessary. All I ask is that you meet my daughters, spend some time with them. If it doesn't work out, no hard feelings." For a long moment, the woman was silent, her eyes searching Alexander's face as if looking for some hidden agenda. Finally she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "My name is Emily Carson, and I think you're either crazy or desperate. Possibly both." Despite himself, Alexander felt a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Probably a bit of both," he admitted. "But I'm also a father who wants to do right by his children. Will you at least consider it?" Emily glanced around the coffee shop, her gaze lingering on the spot where she had comforted the lost boy. When she looked back at Alexander, There was a new resolve in her eyes. "I must be crazy too," she said softly, "but yes, I'll consider it." As they exchanged contact information, Alexander felt a mix of emotions churning inside him. Part of him couldn't believe what he had just done, offering a job to a complete stranger, a woman who was clearly struggling with her own hardships. But another part, a part that had been dormant for far too long, felt a glimmer of hope. Walking back to his car, coffee forgotten, Alexander's mind raced with the implications of what he had just set in motion. He knew there would be obstacles, explaining this to his staff, to his friends, to the girls themselves. But for the first time in months, he felt like he was taking a step in the right direction. As he pulled out into traffic, heading towards his delayed meeting, Alexander allowed himself a moment to imagine what might be. Perhaps, just perhaps, this unexpected encounter could be the beginning of something transformative, not just for his daughters, but for him as well. Emily Carson stood at the wrought iron gates of the Blackwood mansion, her heart pounding in her chest. The small duffel bag slung over her shoulder contained everything she owned in the world, a stark contrast to the opulence that stretched out before her. For a moment she considered turning back, retreating to the familiar streets that had been her home for the past year. But the memory of Alexander Blackwood's earnest plea and the thought of 3 little girls in need of care steeled her resolve. Taking a deep breath, she pressed the intercom button. A crisp voice answered, "Blackwood Residence. How may I assist you?" "I'm Emily Carson," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Mr. Blackwood is expecting me." There was a pause, then a buzz as the gates swung open. Emily walked up the long driveway, acutely aware of her worn shoes on the immaculate pavement. The mansion loomed before her, its windows gleaming in the afternoon sun like watchful eyes. As she approached the front door, it opened to reveal a stern-faced woman in a housekeeper's uniform. "Mrs. Hendricks," she introduced herself, her gaze sweeping over Emily with poorly concealed skepticism. "Mr. Blackwood asked me to show you in. He'll be with you shortly." Emily followed Mrs. Hendricks into a grand foyer, marble floors stretching out beneath a crystal chandelier. The housekeeper's heels clicked sharply against the polished surface, the sound echoing in the cavernous space. Emily felt like an intruder, her presence a smudge on the pristine environment. "Wait here, please," Mrs. Hendricks said, gesturing to a plush settee, "and try not to touch anything." Left alone, Emily perched on the edge of the seat, her bag clutched tightly in her lap. Doubt gnawed at her. What was she doing here? How could she, homeless and broken, possibly fit into this world of wealth and privilege? Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of running feet and high-pitched giggles. 3 identical little girls burst into the foyer, their golden curls bouncing as they chased each other. They skidded to a stop when they saw Emily, their blue eyes wide with curiosity. "Are you our new nanny?" one of them asked, taking a tentative step forward. Emily smiled, feeling some of her tension ease. "I might be," she said softly. "My name is Emily. What are your names?" The boldest of the 3 stepped forward. "I'm Lily," she declared. "That's Rose," she pointed to the girl on her left. "And that's Violet," indicating the one on her right. "It's lovely to meet you all," Emily said, her smile growing more genuine. Despite their identical appearances, she could already sense the distinct personalities of each girl. "Do you know how to play princesses?" Rose asked shyly. "Or build pillow forts?" Violet chimed in. "Or tell stories?" Lily added eagerly. Emily laughed, a warm, rich sound that seemed to fill the cold foyer with life. "I know how to do all of those things," she said. "And I bet you girls could teach me even more games." The triplets exchanged excited glances, clearly warming to the idea of a nanny who understood the importance of play. But before they could pepper Emily with more questions, a deep voice interrupted. "Girls, what have I told you about running in the house?" Alexander Blackwood strode into the foyer, his presence immediately commanding the space. The girls fell silent, their exuberance dimming slightly in their father's presence. Emily stood, smoothing her worn clothes self-consciously. "Mr. Blackwood," she greeted him, extending her hand. "Thank you for this opportunity." Alexander shook her hand, his grip firm and businesslike. "Miss Carson, I'm glad you decided to come." He glanced at his daughters, who were watching the exchange with unconcealed interest. "I see you've met the girls." Emily nodded, her smile returning as she looked at the triplets. "We were just getting acquainted." Alexander's expression softened almost imperceptibly as he regarded his daughters. "Why don't you three go find Mrs. Hendricks? I'm sure she has a snack ready for you." The girls hesitated, clearly reluctant to leave. "Will Emily be here when we're done?" Lily asked, voicing the question on all their minds. Alexander looked at Emily, one eyebrow raised in silent inquiry. Emily felt the weight of the moment, understanding that her response would set the course for what was to come. "I'd love to spend more time with you girls," she said warmly. "If that's all right with your father." Alexander nodded, a flicker of relief passing across his features. "Run along now," he told the girls. "Emily and I need to talk, but you'll see her again soon." As the triplets scampered off, their excited whispers trailing behind them, Alexander turned to Emily. "Let's talk in my study," he said, gesturing for her to follow. The study was a masculine space, all dark wood and leather, with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lining the walls. Alexander settled behind a massive desk, indicating for Emily to take a seat opposite him. "I appreciate you coming, Miss Carson," he began, his tone formal. "But I want to be clear about the unique nature of this situation. My offer is unconventional, to say the least." Emily met his gaze steadily. "Mr. Blackwood, I think we both know that there's nothing conventional about this arrangement. But I'm here because I believe I can help your daughters, and frankly because I need this opportunity." Alexander nodded, a hint of approval in his eyes. "Honesty. Good. That's what I need from you, Miss Carson. Complete honesty." He leaned forward, his hands clasped on the desk. "I'm offering you a position as a live-in nanny for my girls. You'll have your own suite in the east wing of the house, all meals provided, and a generous salary. In return, I expect your full dedication to the girls' care and education." Emily listened, her mind reeling at the prospect of such a drastic change in her circumstances. "May I ask," she ventured, "why me? Surely there are more qualified candidates, with proper references and backgrounds in childcare." Alexander was quiet for a moment, his gaze distant. When he spoke, his voice was softer, tinged with an emotion Emily couldn't quite place. "When I saw you with that lost boy in the coffee shop, I saw something I haven't seen in this house for a long time. Genuine care, compassion, the ability to connect." He met her eyes, his gaze intense. "My girls have everything money can buy, Miss Carson, but they need more than that. They need someone who can give them the emotional support I've been unable to provide." The vulnerability in his admission caught Emily off guard. She saw for a moment not the powerful businessman, but a grieving widower struggling to raise 3 young daughters. "I understand," she said softly, "and I want you to know that if you give me this chance, I'll do everything in my power to be there for your girls, to give them the care and support they need." Alexander studied her for a long moment, as if weighing her words. Finally, he nodded. "Very well, Miss Carson. Consider this a trial period. We'll reassess in a month. If things are working out, we'll make it permanent." Relief and excitement washed over Emily. "Thank you, Mr. Blackwood. You won't regret this." As they stood to shake hands, sealing their agreement, neither of them could have predicted the profound impact this decision would have on all their lives. For Emily, it was a chance at redemption, an opportunity to rebuild her life and make a difference in the lives of 3 young girls. For Alexander, it was a leap of faith, a hope that this unconventional choice might bring warmth and healing back into his home. And for Lily, Rose, and Violet, though they didn't know it yet, it was the beginning of a journey that would transform their world, bringing color and joy back into the cold halls of the Blackwood mansion. As Emily left the study, her heart light with hope for the first time in years, she couldn't help but feel that this was more than just a job. It was a second chance, a new beginning. And she was determined to make the most of it, not just for herself, but for the 3 little girls who had already begun to capture her heart. The first rays of dawn were just beginning to paint the sky when Emily woke in her new room. For a moment, she lay still, disoriented by the softness of the bed and the unfamiliar quiet. It had been so long since she'd slept somewhere safe and comfortable that the luxury of it felt almost overwhelming. As reality settled in, Emily sat up, taking in her surroundings. The room, her room now, was spacious and elegantly furnished, with large windows overlooking the estate's manicured gardens. It was more than just a bedroom. It was a suite complete with a small sitting area and an ensuite bathroom that she still couldn't quite believe was all for her use. Emily rose, padding softly to the window. The grounds of the Blackwood estate stretched out before her, bathed in the soft light of early morning. It was beautiful, peaceful, and completely foreign. Hair whirled away from the streets she'd called home for the past year. As she prepared for the day, Emily couldn't shake a nagging sense of imposter syndrome. What did she, a woman who'd lost everything, know about caring for three privileged little girls? But as she remembered the triplets' eager faces from the day before, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. They needed her, and she was determined not to let them down. Dressed in some of the new clothes that had mysteriously appeared in her closet, courtesy, she assumed, of Mr. Blackwood's efficiency, Emily made her way downstairs. The house was quiet, the staff moving about with practiced silence as they prepared for the day ahead. In the kitchen, she found Mrs. Hendricks overseeing the preparation of breakfast. The housekeeper's eyes narrowed slightly at Emily's appearance, but her tone remained professionally neutral. "Good morning, Miss Carson. The girls usually have breakfast at 7:30. Mr. Blackwood takes his in his study most days." Emily nodded, absorbing the information. "Thank you, Mrs. Hendricks. Is there anything I can do to help?" The older woman seemed taken aback by the offer. "That won't be necessary. Your job is to care for the children, not to engage in household tasks." Emily sensed the unspoken barrier, the clear delineation of roles that existed in this household, but she was determined to find her place, to prove her worth beyond just childcare. "I understand, but I believe it's important for the girls to see adults pitching in and working together. Maybe they could help set the table." Mrs. Hendricks looked as though she might object, but after a moment's consideration, she gave a curt nod. "Very well. The dishes are in that cabinet. Don't let the girls handle anything breakable." It was a small victory, but Emily felt a spark of satisfaction. She was here to care for the girls, yes, but also to bring a sense of normalcy and warmth to their lives, and that started with the little things. At precisely 7:30, the patter of small feet announced the arrival of Lily, Rose, and Violet. They burst into the kitchen, their faces lighting up when they saw Emily. "You're still here!" Lily exclaimed, rushing forward to hug Emily's legs. Emily laughed, warmth spreading through her at the child's enthusiasm. "Of course I am. I told you I'd be here, didn't I?" Rose approached more cautiously, her eyes wide. "Are you really going to be our new nanny?" "I am," Emily confirmed, kneeling down to be at eye level with the girls. "And I'm very excited to get to know all of you better." Violet, the quietest of the three, simply smiled shyly, half hiding behind her sisters. "Girls," Emily said, "how would you like to help me set the table for breakfast? It'll be our first job together." The triplets exchanged excited glances, clearly unused to being included in such tasks. Under Emily's guidance, they carefully carried napkins and silverware to the dining room, their little faces screwed up in concentration. As they worked, Emily gently drew them out, asking questions about their likes and dislikes, their favorite games and stories. By the time breakfast was served, the initial shyness had melted away, replaced by a bubbling excitement. They were halfway through their meal when Alexander Blackwood appeared in the doorway, briefcase in hand. The girls immediately fell silent, their postures straightening almost imperceptibly. "Good morning, Daddy," they chorused, their voices subdued. Alexander nodded, his expression softening slightly as he regarded his daughters. "Good morning, girls. I trust you're behaving for Miss Carson." "Oh, they've been wonderful," Emily interjected warmly. "In fact, they've been quite helpful this morning." Alexander raised an eyebrow, glancing at the neatly set table. "Is that so?" He seemed about to say more, but instead checked his watch and frowned. "I have an early meeting. I'll be home late tonight." "Miss Carson, ensure the girls complete their lessons for the day." With that, he was gone, leaving a palpable silence in his wake. Emily looked at the triplets, noting the disappointment in their eyes, masked quickly behind polite smiles. It was clear that such brief formal interactions with their father were the norm. "Well," Emily said brightly, determined to lift the mood, "what shall we do after breakfast? I heard something about pillow forts yesterday. I think that sounds like an excellent way to start our day together, don't you?" The girls' faces lit up once more, and soon the dining room was filled with chatter and laughter as they planned their imaginary castle. As Emily listened to their excited plans, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. These girls needed more than just a caretaker. They needed someone to bring joy and warmth back into their lives. As the day progressed, Emily found herself constantly amazed by the triplets. Despite their identical appearance, their personalities shone through in every interaction. Lily, bold and outspoken, often took the lead in their games. Rose, thoughtful and creative, came up with intricate storylines for their imaginative play. And Violet, though quiet, revealed a keen intelligence and dry wit that often took Emily by surprise. They built their pillow fort in the playroom, transforming the space into a magical kingdom. Emily taught them songs she remembered from her teaching days, their sweet voices filling the room as they sang about faraway lands and brave adventures. But it wasn't all play. Emily made sure to incorporate learning into their activities, turning a game of hide-and-seek into a lesson on counting and spatial awareness, and using their fort as a setting for storytelling that subtly included elements of history and geography. As the day wound down and the girls prepared for bed, Emily felt a deep sense of contentment. It had been a good day, a wonderful day, in fact. But as she tucked each girl in, reading them a bedtime story and kissing their foreheads, she couldn't help but feel a twinge of sadness at the absence of their father. Later that night, as Emily sat in her room reflecting on the day, she heard the distant sound of a car pulling up to the house. Alexander was home. She considered going downstairs, perhaps sharing some of the day's highlights with him, but something held her back. It wasn't her place, not yet. She was still an outsider here, walking a fine line between employee and caregiver. As she prepared for bed, Emily made a silent promise to herself and to the girls. She would do everything in her power to bring light and love into this house, to help heal the wounds that seemed to run so deep in the Blackwood family. It wouldn't be easy, she knew. There would be challenges ahead, barriers to overcome. But as she drifted off to sleep, the memory of the girls' laughter echoing in her mind, Emily felt hope blooming in her heart. This was more than just a job. It was a calling, a chance to make a real difference. And she was determined to make the most of it, one day at a time. Little did she know that her presence in the Blackwood household was already setting in motion changes that would transform all of their lives in ways none of them could have imagined. As the days turned into weeks, Emily settled into a routine at the Blackwood mansion. Each morning she woke before dawn, taking a moment to marvel at the luxury that surrounded her before diving into the day's responsibilities. The initial awe of her new surroundings had faded, replaced by a determined focus on her mission, to bring warmth and joy into the lives of Lily, Rose, and Violet. The triplets, for their part, blossomed under Emily's care. Their days were filled with a balance of structured learning and imaginative play, each activity carefully designed to nurture their individual strengths while encouraging growth in areas where they struggled. Lily's natural leadership qualities were channeled into organizing group activities, teaching her the importance of considering others' feelings and ideas. Rose's creativity found new outlets in art projects and storytelling exercises that also helped build her confidence. And Violet, the quietest of the three, was gently encouraged to express herself more, her insightful observations and clever wit gradually emerging from behind her shy exterior. But despite the progress with the girls, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. Alexander Blackwood remained an elusive figure, his interactions with his daughters limited to brief exchanges at breakfast or a quick goodnight kiss before he retreated to his study. The gulf between father and daughters was painfully apparent, and Emily found herself increasingly determined to bridge that gap. One evening, as Emily was helping the girls prepare for bed, Lily asked a question that caught her off guard. "Miss Emily," she said, her voice small and hesitant, "do you think Daddy doesn't like spending time with us?" The question hung in the air, heavy with unspoken emotion. Emily's heart clenched as she saw the mixture of hope and fear in Lily's eyes, mirrored in the faces of Rose and Violet. "Oh, sweetheart," Emily said, gathering all three girls into a hug. "Your daddy loves you very much. Sometimes grown-ups have a hard time showing their feelings, especially when they're sad or worried about something." "Is Daddy sad?" Rose asked, her brow furrowed with concern. Emily chose her words carefully. "I think your daddy misses your mommy very much, just like you do. And sometimes when people are missing someone they love, it can be hard for them to show happiness, even to the people they care about most." The girls were quiet for a moment, digesting this information. Then Violet, in her soft voice, suggested, "Maybe we could make Daddy happy again. "That's a wonderful idea," Emily said, her mind already racing with possibilities. "Why don't we think of something special we could do for him? Something to show him how much you love him?" The suggestion sparked a flurry of ideas from the girls. As Emily tucked them into bed that night, their heads were filled with plans for Operation Cheer Up Daddy, as Lily had enthusiastically dubbed it. Later that night, Emily sat in the quiet of her room, reflecting on the conversation. She knew she was walking a fine line. Her job was to care for the girls, not to interfere in family dynamics. But seeing the pain in those young eyes, the longing for their father's attention, she couldn't stand idly by. The next morning, Emily approached Mrs. Hendricks with a proposal. "I'd like to arrange a special dinner," she explained. "Something for Mr. Blackwood and the girls. Do you think the kitchen could prepare their favorite meals?" Mrs. Hendricks regarded Emily with a mixture of surprise and suspicion. "Mr. Blackwood's schedule is very tight. He rarely has time for family dinners." "I understand," Emily said, undeterred. "But perhaps if we planned it in advance, found an evening when he's less busy. The girls miss him, Mrs. Hendricks. They need time with their father." The housekeeper's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "I'll speak to his assistant," she said finally, "but I make no promises." It took nearly 2 weeks of careful planning and coordination, but finally, a date was set. The girls threw themselves into preparations with gusto, creating handmade placemats and centerpieces, practicing a song they wanted to perform for their father. On the evening of the dinner, Emily helped the triplets dress in their favorite outfits. The excitement in the air was palpable as they made their way to the dining room, which had been transformed with soft lighting and flowers. Alexander arrived promptly at 7, looking somewhat bemused by the fuss. But as he took in the eager faces of his daughters and the carefully prepared table, his expression softened. "What's all this?" he asked, a hint of a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "It's for you, Daddy," Lily exclaimed. "We wanted to have a special dinner with you." "We missed you," Rose added softly. For a moment, Alexander seemed at a loss for words. Then, to everyone's surprise, he knelt down, opening his arms. The girls rushed into his embrace, their little arms wrapping tightly around him. Emily watched from the doorway, her heart swelling at the sight. It was a small moment, perhaps, but it felt like a breakthrough. The dinner that followed was filled with laughter and conversation. The girls regaled their father with stories of their recent adventures, their eyes shining as they basked in his undivided attention. Alexander, for his part, seemed to relax as the evening wore on, his usual stern demeanor giving way to genuine smiles and even the occasional chuckle. As the girls performed their carefully rehearsed song after dessert, Emily caught Alexander's eye. The gratitude in his gaze was unmistakable, and she felt a warm glow of satisfaction. This was why she was here. This was the difference she could make. Later that night, after the girls had been tucked into bed, still buzzing with excitement from the evening, Emily was surprised to find Alexander waiting for her in the hallway. "Miss Carson," he said, his voice low, I wanted to thank you. For arranging this evening. I hadn't realized how much I needed it." Emily smiled, touched by the vulnerability in his normally composed demeanor. "You're welcome, Mr. Blackwood. The girls adore you. They just want to spend time with their father." Alexander nodded, a flicker of regret passing across his features. "I haven't been very present, have I? I've been so focused on work, on keeping everything running, I've neglected what's most important." "It's not too late," Emily said gently. "They're young, resilient, and they love you so much." For a moment they stood in silence, the weight of unspoken emotions hanging between them. Then Alexander cleared his throat, his professional mask slipping back into place. "Well, thank you again, Miss Carson. You've been good for the girls. Good night." As he walked away, Emily felt a mix of emotions: pride in the small victory of the evening, hope for the changes it might bring, and an unexpected pang of something else, a warmth in her chest when Alexander had looked at her with gratitude. Shaking off the confusing feelings, Emily retired to her room. As she prepared for bed, she couldn't help but feel that tonight had been a turning point. The ripples of change were spreading through the Blackwood household, subtle but undeniable. What she didn't know was that these ripples would soon grow into waves, challenging everything she thought she knew about her place in this family and her own heart. The journey ahead would be filled with unexpected twists, difficult choices, and the possibility of a love she had never dared to imagine. As Emily drifted off to sleep, the echoes of laughter and music still lingering in the air, she felt a sense of anticipation. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she was ready to face them. For the girls, for Alexander, and for the chance to be part of something truly special. The weeks following the family dinner brought a subtle but noticeable change to the Blackwood household. Alexander made an effort to be more present, carving out time in his busy schedule for bedtime stories and weekend outings with the girls. The sound of laughter, once a rarity in the grand halls of the mansion, became a more frequent occurrence. Emily watched these changes with a mixture of joy and cautious optimism. She saw how the girls blossomed under their father's increased attention, their confidence growing day by day. Yet she couldn't shake the feeling that there was still a barrier, an unspoken pain that kept Alexander from fully embracing his role as a father. One crisp autumn morning, Emily decided to take the girls for a nature walk on the estate grounds. As they collected colorful leaves and pine cones, chattering excitedly about the art project they would create with their finds, Emily noticed Violet lagging behind, her usual quiet demeanor tinged with sadness. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" Emily asked gently, kneeling beside the little girl. Violet's big blue eyes welled with tears. "I miss Mommy," she whispered. "Daddy never talks about her. It's like she never existed." Emily's heart clenched. She gathered Violet into a hug, looking over at Lily and Rose, who had stopped their collecting to listen. The pain in their eyes was unmistakable. "Your Mommy will always be a part of you," Emily said softly, including all three girls in her gaze. "Just because we don't talk about her doesn't mean we forget her. Sometimes it's hard for people to talk about those they've lost because the pain feels too big. But we want to remember her," Lily said, her voice uncharacteristically small. "We're afraid we'll forget what she looked like, how she laughed." Emily made a decision in that moment. She knew it might be overstepping, but she couldn't bear to see the girls in such pain. "Why don't we do something special to remember your mom? We could make a memory book with pictures and stories about her. Would you like that?" The girls' faces lit up at the suggestion, and they spent the rest of the walk planning their project. Emily's mind, however, was racing. She knew she would need to approach Alexander about this, and she wasn't sure how he would react. That evening, after the girls were in bed, Emily steeled herself and knocked on the door of Alexander's study. His deep voice called for her to enter. Alexander looked up from his desk, surprise flickering across his features. "Miss Carson? Is everything all right with the girls?" Emily took a deep breath. "The girls are fine, Mr. Blackwood, but there's something I need to discuss with you. It's about their mother." The change in Alexander's demeanor was immediate. His body tensed, his expression closing off. "What about her?" he asked, his voice clipped. Undeterred, Emily pressed on. "The girls miss her, Mr. Blackwood. They're afraid they're going to forget her. I suggested we might make a memory book with pictures and stories. But I wanted to check with you first." For a long moment, Alexander was silent, his gaze fixed on a point somewhere beyond Emily. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, tight with suppressed emotion. "I don't think that's a good idea, Miss Carson. The past is the past. It's better left there." Emily felt a flash of frustration. "With all due respect, Mr. Blackwood, ignoring the past won't make it go away. The girls need to grieve, to remember their mother. Keeping her memory alive isn't a betrayal of moving forward." Alexander stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "You're overstepping, Miss Carson. Your job is to care for the girls, not to make decisions about how my family deals with loss." The pain in his voice was palpable, and Emily's frustration melted into compassion. "I understand this is difficult, Mr. Blackwood, but your daughters are hurting. They need to know it's okay to talk about their mother, to miss her." For a moment, Emily thought Alexander might dismiss her outright, but then, almost imperceptibly, his shoulders sagged. He sank back into his chair, suddenly looking older, more vulnerable than she had ever seen him. "I don't know how," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "Every time I think about Sophia, it feels like losing her all over again. How can I help the girls when I can barely hold myself together?" Emily moved closer, her heart aching for the broken man before her. "By letting them see that it's okay to grieve, by sharing your memories of her, by keeping her alive in your hearts. It won't be easy, but you don't have to do it alone." Alexander looked up at her, his eyes shining with unshed tears. Will you help us? With the memory book? Of course, Emily said softly. We'll do it together. The next few weeks were an emotional journey for the entire Blackwood family. Emily guided the girls in creating their memory book, filling it with photographs, drawings, and stories about their mother. At first, Alexander's participation was hesitant, limited to providing photos and answering direct questions. But as the project progressed, Emily noticed him lingering longer during these sessions, occasionally offering a memory or anecdote of his own. One evening, as Emily was helping the girls paste photos into the book, Alexander joined them in the playroom. He sat down on the floor beside Violet, picking up a photograph of Sophia. "This was taken on our honeymoon," he said softly, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Your mother insisted on climbing to the top of this ridiculously tall lighthouse. She said she wanted to see the whole world from up there." The girls crowded around, eager to hear more. And to Emily's amazement, Alexander continued, sharing story after story about their mother, her love of adventure, her terrible cooking skills, the way her laugh could light up a room. As she watched Alexander with his daughters, Emily felt a warmth spreading through her chest. This was healing in action, the slow but steady mending of a family torn apart by grief. Later that night, after the girls had gone to bed, Emily found Alexander standing in the hallway, gazing at a portrait of Sophia that hung there. "Thank you," he said quietly as Emily approached. "I didn't realize how much I needed this too." Emily smiled, touched by the gratitude in his voice. "You're welcome. The girls are so happy to be able to talk about their mother. It's bringing you all closer together." Alexander turned to face her, his eyes searching her face. "You've brought so much light back into this house, Emily. I don't know how to thank you." The use of her first name, so unprecedented, sent a shiver down Emily's spine. She was suddenly acutely aware of how close they were standing, of the intensity in Alexander's gaze. "I'm just doing my job," she said softly, trying to ignore the quickening of her heartbeat. "No," Alexander said, shaking his head. "It's more than that. You've become important to us, to me." The air between them seemed to crackle with unspoken tension. For a moment, Emily thought Alexander might say more, might even move closer. But then, as if catching himself, he took a step back. "Good night, Miss Carson," he said, his voice regaining its usual formality. "Thank you again for everything." As Emily watched him walk away, she felt a confusing mix of emotions: relief, disappointment, and something else, a longing she hadn't allowed herself to acknowledge until now. She made her way back to her room, her mind whirling. The lines between employer and employee, between nanny and friend, were becoming increasingly blurred, and somewhere in the midst of it all, unexpected feelings were taking root. As she prepared for bed, Emily knew that the coming days would bring new challenges. The healing process had begun, but there was still a long road ahead. And her own heart, she realized with a mix of excitement and trepidation, was no longer as guarded as she had thought. The Blackwood family was changing, growing, healing, and Emily, once an outsider, now found herself inextricably bound to their journey. Whatever came next, she knew there was no turning back. The crisp autumn air had given way to the first chill of winter, and the Blackwood estate was transforming. Barren trees stood like sentinels against a grey sky, while inside the mansion, fires crackled in ornate fireplaces, casting a warm glow through the rooms. The change in seasons mirrored the transformation within the family itself, a gradual thawing of long-frozen emotions, a tentative reaching towards warmth and connection. Emily found herself at the center of this change, a catalyst and a witness to the healing taking place around her. The memory book project had opened a floodgate of emotions for the Blackwoods. The girls now spoke freely of their mother, sharing memories and asking questions that would have been unthinkable just months ago. Alexander, too, had begun to open up, his stern facade cracking to reveal glimpses of the man he had once been, a loving husband and doting father. But with this emotional thaw came new challenges. Emily found herself increasingly aware of Alexander's presence, her heart quickening whenever he entered a room, the gratitude in his eyes, the occasional brush of his hand against hers as they pored over old photographs. Each interaction left her feeling both elated and conflicted. One chilly morning, as Emily helped the girls prepare for a day of homeschooling, Lily piped up with an innocent question that caught her off guard. "Miss Emily," she asked, her blue eyes wide with curiosity, "are you going to be our new mommy?" Emily froze, feeling as though the air had been sucked from the room. Rose and Violet looked up expectantly, their faces a mixture of hope and uncertainty. "Oh, sweethearts," Emily said, her voice gentle but firm, "I care about you all very much, but I'm not here to replace your mommy. No one could ever do that. I'm here to take care of you and to be your friend." The girls seemed to accept this answer, but Emily couldn't shake the unease that settled over her. She had always been careful to maintain professional boundaries, but had her affection for the family, for Alexander, become too obvious? Later that day, as the girls were engrossed in their lessons, Emily seized a moment to speak with Mrs. Hendricks. The housekeeper had warmed to her over the months, and Emily hoped she might offer some guidance. "Mrs. Hendricks," Emily began hesitantly, "I'm worried that I might be confusing the girls. They asked me this morning if I was going to be their new mother." The older woman's eyebrows rose, a knowing look crossing her face. "Ah," she said simply, "I was wondering when this might come up." Emily felt her cheeks flush. "I've never given them any reason to think. I'm just doing my job." Mrs. Hendricks regarded her with a mixture of sympathy and amusement. "My dear, you've brought life back into this house. The girls adore you, and Mr. Blackwood—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Well, let's just say I haven't seen him smile this much since before Mrs. Blackwood's passing." Emily's heart fluttered at these words, but she pushed the feeling aside. "I don't want to overstep my boundaries. Maybe I've become too familiar, too involved." The housekeeper shook her head. "You've done exactly what this family needed, but I understand your concern. Perhaps it would be wise to have a conversation with Mr. Blackwood to ensure you're both on the same page regarding your role here." Emily nodded, grateful for the advice, but apprehensive about the conversation ahead. How could she discuss boundaries with Alexander when her own feelings were becoming so muddled? Her opportunity came sooner than expected. That evening, after the girls had been tucked into bed, Emily found Alexander in his study. He looked up as she entered, a warm smile spreading across his face. "Emily," he said, her name sounding intimate in the quiet of the room. "Is everything all right?" She took a deep breath, steeling herself. "Mr. Blackwood, I wanted to talk to you about something. It's about my role here with the girls." Alexander's brow furrowed in concern. "Has something happened? Are you unhappy here?" "No, not at all," Emily rushed to reassure him. "It's just, the girls asked me this morning if I was going to be their new mother. I'm worried that perhaps I've become too familiar. I don't want to confuse them or overstep my boundaries." Alexander was quiet for a long moment, his expression unreadable. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and intense. "Emily, you've become far more than just an employee in this household. The girls adore you, and I—" He trailed off, seeming to catch himself. "You've brought healing to this family. I don't think there's any going back to a purely professional relationship." Emily's heart raced at his words, at the implication behind them. "I care deeply for the girls," she said softly. "And for all of you. But I'm not sure what that means for my position here." Alexander stood, moving around the desk to stand before her. "Perhaps it's time we redefine your role. Not as an employee, but as part of this family." The air between them seemed to crackle with tension. Emily was acutely aware of how close Alexander was standing, of the intensity in his gaze. For a moment, it seemed as though he might reach out to her, might close the distance between them. But before either of them could act on the charged moment, a shrill ring cut through the air. Alexander's cell phone, vibrating urgently on his desk, shattered the intimate atmosphere. With a muttered apology, Alexander answered the call. His expression quickly shifted from annoyance to concern. "Slow down, Jessica. What's happened?" Emily watched as Alexander's face paled, his knuckles whitening as he gripped the phone. When he hung up, he turned to her with a grim expression. "There's been a fire at one of my company's factories," he said, his voice tight with stress. "No one's hurt, but the damage, it could be catastrophic for the business. I have to go immediately." Emily nodded, pushing aside her personal feelings in the face of this crisis. "Of course. Don't worry about the girls. I'll take care of everything here." Alexander looked at her with gratitude and something else. a longing that mirrored her own. "I don't know what I'd do without you," he said softly. Then, seeming to shake himself, he added, "I'll call when I know more. It might be a few days before I can return." As Emily watched Alexander rush to pack a bag and make hurried arrangements, she felt a sense of unease settle over her. The conversation they'd begun had been left unfinished, the implications of his words and actions hanging in the air between them. And now, with this new crisis looming, Emily couldn't help but wonder what other challenges lay ahead. The fragile healing that had begun in the Blackwood family suddenly seemed precarious, threatened by outside forces beyond their control. As she made her way back to her room that night, Emily's mind whirled with conflicting emotions. Concern for Alexander and the potential impact of this crisis on the family warred with her own confused feelings. And beneath it all, a nagging worry. Had she truly overstepped her boundaries? And if so, was there any way to step back without breaking the hearts of the three little girls who had come to depend on her? Sleep eluded her as she tossed and turned, the weight of uncertainty pressing down on her. Whatever the coming days might bring, Emily knew that the delicate balance they had all been maintaining was about to be tested. And she couldn't shake the feeling that her own heart hung in the balance, caught between duty and desire, between the family she had come to love and the professional boundaries she had sworn to uphold. As the wind howled outside her window, Emily stared into the darkness, bracing herself for the storm she sensed was coming, not just for the Blackwood business, but for all of them, in ways she couldn't yet begin to imagine. The days following Alexander's sudden departure were filled with a tense anticipation that seemed to permeate every corner of the Blackwood mansion. Emily did her best to maintain a sense of normalcy for the girls, but she couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled over the household. Lily, Rose, and Violet, perceptive as ever, sensed the change in atmosphere. Their questions about their father's absence grew more frequent and worried as the days passed. "When is Daddy coming home?" Violet asked one evening as Emily tucked her into bed. "Soon, sweetheart," Emily reassured her, smoothing back the little girl's golden curls. "Your daddy has some important work to take care of, but he'll be back as soon as he can." "Is it because of the fire?" Lily chimed in from her bed across the room. "I heard Mrs. Hendricks talking about it." She sounded scared. Emily sighed, realizing she couldn't shield the girls entirely from the reality of the situation. "Yes, there was a fire at one of your father's factories, but no one was hurt. And your daddy is working very hard to fix everything." "Is he going to lose his job?" Rose asked, her big blue eyes wide with worry. "No, honey," Emily said firmly, gathering all three girls into a hug. "Your daddy owns the company. He's just working to make sure everyone else keeps their jobs. Everything's going to be okay." As she said the words, Emily hoped fervently that they were true. The few brief phone calls she'd had with Alexander had left her worried. He sounded exhausted, stressed, and overwhelmed by the magnitude of the crisis he was facing. Late that night, after the girls were asleep, Emily's phone buzzed with a text from Alexander. "Are you awake?" it read. Emily's heart quickened as she replied, "Yes. Is everything all right?" A moment later, her phone rang. Alexander's voice on the other end sounded ragged, drained of its usual confidence. "Emily," he said, her name a sigh of relief. "I'm sorry to call so late. I needed to hear a friendly voice." "Don't apologize," Emily said softly. "How are things going there?" There was a long pause before Alexander spoke again. "It's bad, Emily. The damage from the fire is extensive. The insurance will cover some of it, but the lost production time, the contracts we might lose. I'm not sure how we're going to recover from this." Emily's heart ached at the defeat in his voice. "Alexander," she said gently, the use of his first name feeling intimate in the quiet of her room, "you're one of the most capable, determined people I've ever met. If anyone can find a way through this, it's you." "I'm not so sure this time," Alexander admitted. "I've been on the phone with lawyers, insurance agents, contractors. Everyone wants answers I don't have, and all I can think about is what this might mean for the girls. If the company goes under—" "Don't think like that," Emily interrupted firmly. "You're exhausted and overwhelmed, but this isn't the end. You'll find a solution. And no matter what happens with the company, you have three little girls here who adore you. That's what really matters." There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line, and when Alexander spoke again, his voice was thick with emotion. "What would I do without you, Emily? You've become You're so important to us." "To me?" Emily's breath caught in her throat, her heart racing at his words. "I'm just doing my job," she said softly, even as she knew it wasn't entirely true. "No," Alexander said, his voice low and intense. "It's more than that. You're holding us together. I don't know how to thank you." The conversation shifted then, moving to lighter topics. Emily told Alexander about the girls' latest adventures, about the new art project they'd started, about the funny thing Violet had said at dinner. As they talked, she could hear the tension gradually easing from Alexander's voice. Finally, after nearly an hour, Alexander sighed. "I should let you get some sleep. Thank you for this, Emily. I feel lighter, more hopeful." "Any time," Emily said warmly. "We're all here for you, Alexander. Don't forget that." After they hung up, Emily lay awake for a long time, her mind swirling with conflicting emotions. The care she felt for Alexander and the girls had long since crossed the line from professional to personal. But now, with this crisis looming over them, the lines seemed to blur even further. The next morning, Emily woke to find Mrs. Hendricks in a state of agitation. "Miss Carson," the housekeeper said as soon as Emily entered the kitchen, "have you seen the news?" Emily's heart sank as Mrs. Hendricks handed her a tablet. The headline blared, "Blackwood Industries in crisis. CEO Alexander Blackwood faces potential bankruptcy." The article went on to detail the extent of the damage from the fire, speculating on the company's financial stability and Alexander's ability to weather the storm. It was filled with quotes from anonymous sources, painting a grim picture of the company's future. "We can't let the girls see this," Emily said firmly, handing the tablet back to Mrs. Hendricks. "They're worried enough as it is." The housekeeper nodded in agreement, but her face was creased with concern. "What's going to happen to us, Miss Carson? If Mr. Blackwood loses everything?" Emily placed a reassuring hand on the older woman's shoulder. "We can't think like that. Mr. Blackwood is a smart, resourceful man. He'll find a way through this. For now, our job is to keep things running smoothly here and to support the girls." As she spoke, Emily realized she was trying to convince herself as much as Mrs. Hendricks. The reality of the situation was beginning to sink in, and the implications were staggering. If Alexander's company went under, it wouldn't just affect him. It would impact everyone in the household, including herself. The days that followed were a delicate balancing act. Emily threw herself into caring for the girls, organizing elaborate craft projects and imaginative games to keep their minds off their father's absence and the tension that hung over the house. But in quiet moments when the girls were asleep or engrossed in their lessons, she found herself haunted by worry. What would happen to all of them if the worst came to pass? The girls, who had already lost so much, faced the prospect of losing their home, their stability. And Emily, she might lose this family that had come to mean everything to her. A week after Alexander's departure, Emily received another late-night call. Her heart raced as she answered, fearing bad news. "Emily," Alexander's voice came through, sounding more energized than it had in days. "I think I've found a solution. It's risky, and it's going to take every resource we have, but I think we can save the company." As he outlined his plan, a combination of asset sales, renegotiated contracts, and a risky but potentially lucrative new venture, Emily felt a surge of hope. This was the Alexander she knew, brilliant, determined, unwilling to give up in the face of adversity. "When are you coming home?" she asked when he had finished explaining. There was a pause before Alexander answered. "Tomorrow. I need to be there in person to set things in motion, and I need to see the girls, to see all of you." The warmth in his voice sent a shiver down Emily's spine. "We'll be here," she said softly. "We're all looking forward to having you home." As she hung up the phone, Emily felt a mix of relief and apprehension. Alexander was coming home, bringing with him a plan to save his company and their way of life. But she also knew that his return would mean facing the unresolved tension between them, the unspoken feelings that had been building for months. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new complications. But for now, Emily allowed herself a moment of hope. Whatever storms lay ahead, they would weather them together, as a family. The Blackwood mansion buzzed with anticipation on the morning of Alexander's return. Emily had shared the good news with Mrs. Hendricks and the rest of the staff, and there was a palpable sense of relief in the air. The girls, excited by the prospect of their father's homecoming, were a whirlwind of energy as they helped Emily prepare a welcome home celebration. "Do you think Daddy will like the banner we made?" Rose asked, her small face scrunched in concentration as she added another glittery star to the homemade sign. "He's going to love it," Emily assured her, smiling at the sight of the three girls working together, their golden heads bent over their creation. "Your dad is going to be so happy to see all of you." As the morning wore on, Emily found herself growing increasingly nervous. The last conversation she'd had with Alexander before he left played over and over in her mind. The unfinished discussion about her role in the family, the charged moment they'd shared. What would it be like when he returned? She pushed the thoughts aside, focusing instead on the girls and the tasks at hand. There was a special dinner to prepare, rooms to tidy, and 3 excited little girls to keep occupied. It was late afternoon when they heard the sound of a car pulling up the driveway. Lily, who had appointed herself lookout, came running into the playroom where Emily was helping Rose and Violet put the finishing touches on their welcome home cards. "He's here! Daddy's home!" Lily exclaimed, practically bouncing with excitement. Emily's heart leapt, a mixture of joy and apprehension flooding through her. "All right, girls," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Let's go greet your father." They made their way to the foyer, the girls barely containing their excitement. Emily hung back slightly, wanting to give the family a moment to reunite. The front door opened and Alexander stepped in, looking tired but relieved to be home. His eyes lit up as he saw his daughters. "Daddy!" the girls cried in unison, rushing forward to engulf him in a group hug. Alexander knelt down, gathering all 3 into his arms. "Oh, my darlings," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I've missed you so much." Emily watched the scene, her heart full. This was what mattered most. This connection, this love. Whatever challenges lay ahead, this family bond would see them through. As Alexander stood, his eyes met Emily's over the girls' heads. The look they shared was charged with unspoken feelings, a mixture of gratitude, relief, and something deeper that made Emily's breath catch in her throat. "Welcome home, Mr. Blackwood," she said softly. "Thank you, Emily," he replied, his use of her first name sending a shiver down her spine. "For everything." The evening that followed was a joyous affair. The girls proudly presented their homemade banner and cards, chattering excitedly about everything their father had missed. Alexander listened attentively, his face relaxed and happy in a way Emily hadn't seen in months. As they sat down to the special dinner Emily had prepared with Mrs. Hendrick's help, Alexander addressed the whole family, including the staff who had gathered to welcome him home. "I want to thank all of you," he began, his voice carrying a weight of sincerity. "These past weeks have been incredibly challenging, but knowing I had all of you here keeping things running smoothly, taking care of the girls, it gave me the strength to keep fighting." He went on to explain in simple terms that even the girls could understand the plan to save the company. There would be changes, he said, some sacrifices to be made, but he was confident they would weather this storm. "We're going to be okay," he concluded, his gaze sweeping over everyone before landing on Emily. "More than okay, I think." Later that night, after the girls had been tucked into bed, their excitement finally giving way to exhaustion, Emily found herself alone with Alexander in his study. The atmosphere between them was charged, filled with all the things left unsaid before his departure. "Emily," Alexander began, taking a step towards her, "I can't begin to thank you for everything you've done. They're thriving despite all this uncertainty, and it's because of you." Emily felt a blush creep up her cheeks. "I just did what needed to be done. The girls are remarkable. They're strong, just like their father." Alexander's eyes softened at her words. "We never finished our conversation before I left," he said quietly. "About your role here in this family." Emily's heart raced. "No, we didn't," she agreed, her voice barely above a whisper. "I meant what I said then," Alexander continued, moving closer. "You've become so much more than an employee here. The girls adore you, and He paused, seeming to gather his courage. "I've come to care for you, Emily. More than I thought possible." The admission hung in the air between them, heavy with possibility. Emily felt as though she was standing on the edge of a precipice, knowing that her next words would change everything. "Alexander," she began, her voice trembling slightly, "I care for you too, and for the girls, so much. But I'm afraid of complicating things. of disappointing you or the girls if it doesn't work out. Alexander reached out, gently taking her hand in his. I understand your fears. I have them too. But Emily, these past weeks have shown me what's truly important. Life is too short, too precious to let fear hold us back. As they stood there, hands clasped, eyes locked, the air seemed to crackle with potential. Emily knew that they were on the brink of something profound, something that would alter the course of all their lives. But before either of them could speak again, a small voice came from the doorway. Daddy? Miss Emily? They turned to see Violet standing there in her pajamas, her favorite stuffed animal clutched to her chest. What is it, sweetheart? Alexander asked, his voice gentle as he knelt down to his daughter's level. I had a bad dream, Violet said, her lower lip trembling. Can both of you tuck me in again? Emily and Alexander exchanged a look, a silent understanding passing between them. Whatever was developing between them, whatever challenges lay ahead, the children would always come first. Of course we can, Emily said warmly, holding out her hand to Violet. As they walked hand in hand to the girls' bedroom, Emily felt a sense of rightness settle over her. This, she realized, was what family truly meant, facing fears together, supporting each other through good times and bad, and always, always putting love first. The conversation in the study remained unfinished, the future still uncertain, but as Emily watched Alexander tenderly soothe his daughter back to sleep, she knew in her heart that they would find their way forward together. The storm might not be over, but they had found their anchor in each other, in this unconventional, beautiful family they were building day by day. The days following Alexander's return brought a new rhythm to the Blackwood household. The air was charged with a mixture of hope and uncertainty as Alexander threw himself into implementing his plan to save the company. Emily found herself navigating not only her usual responsibilities with the girls, but also a shifting dynamic with Alexander that left her both exhilarated and apprehensive. One crisp morning, as Emily supervised the girls during their art lesson in the sunroom, she caught sight of Alexander through the window. He was pacing the garden, phone pressed to his ear, gesticulating as he spoke. Even from a distance, she could see the tension in his shoulders, the furrow in his brow that spoke of the immense pressure he was under. Miss Emily? Lily's voice drew her attention back to the room. Is everything okay? Emily turned to find all three girls watching her, their young faces etched with concern. She realized with a start that she had stopped mid-sentence in her instruction, her worry for Alexander momentarily overriding everything else. Everything's fine, sweetheart, Emily assured them, pasting on a smile. Now, where were we? Yes, we were talking about mixing colors to create new shades. As she guided the girls through their painting exercise, Emily couldn't help but marvel at their resilience. Despite the undercurrent of tension in the house, the triplets remained largely cheerful, finding joy in their daily activities and each other's company. Yet she noticed the way their eyes would track their father whenever he was in sight, the quiet moments when one or another of them would grow pensive, clearly processing the changes around them in their own way. Later that afternoon, as Emily was helping Mrs. Hendricks prepare dinner, Alexander appeared in the kitchen doorway. He looked tired, but there was a glimmer of excitement in his eyes. Emily, Mrs. Hendricks, he greeted them. I hope I'm not interrupting, but I have some news I'd like to share with everyone. Could you gather the staff in the main living room in about an hour? Of course, Mr. Blackwood, Mrs. Hendricks replied promptly. I'll see to it right away. As the housekeeper bustled off, Alexander's gaze lingered on Emily. How are the girls? He asked softly. They're doing well, Emily assured him. They miss spending time with you, but they understand you're working hard to fix things. Alexander's expression softened with a mixture of guilt and affection. I've been neglecting them again, haven't I? After I promised myself I wouldn't let that happen. Emily stepped closer, instinctively reaching out to touch his arm. You're doing your best in a difficult situation. The girls know that. They're proud of you. For a moment they stood there, the air between them thick with unspoken emotions. Then Alexander cleared his throat, taking a small step back. Thank you, Emily, for everything. I hope we can talk more later after the meeting. Emily nodded, her heart racing at the implication in his words. Of course, I'll make sure the girls are there too. An hour later, the Blackwood family and their staff were assembled in the living room. The girls sat on the plush carpet at Emily's feet, whispering excitedly among themselves. Mrs. Hendricks and the other staff members stood respectfully along the walls, their faces a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. Alexander entered the room, his presence immediately commanding everyone's attention. He smiled warmly at his daughters before addressing the group. "Thank you all for coming," he began. "As you know, we've been facing some significant challenges with the company. I'm happy to report that thanks to some strategic decisions and the hard work of many people, we're on a path to recovery." A collective sigh of relief swept through the room. Alexander held up a hand, indicating he wasn't finished. "However," he continued, his tone growing more serious, "the road ahead won't be easy. We'll need to make some changes, tighten our belts in some areas. But I want you all to know that your jobs are secure. This household, this family is my top priority." Emily felt a wave of admiration wash over her. Even in the face of professional challenges, Alexander's first thought was for the well-being of those who depended on him. "There's one more thing," Alexander said, his gaze sweeping the room before landing on Emily and the girls. "Part of our recovery plan involves expanding into new markets. To that end, I'll need to travel more frequently in the coming months. I'll be leaving for New York next week for an extended business trip." Emily felt her heart sink at these words. She saw the same disappointment reflected in the girls' faces. They had just gotten their father back, and now he would be leaving again. "I know this isn't ideal," Alexander continued, as if sensing the room's reaction. "But I promise I'll do everything in my power to stay connected. Video calls, regular updates, and I'll need all of you to keep things running smoothly here." His eyes met Emily's, conveying a silent plea for understanding and support. As the meeting concluded and the staff began to disperse, Emily found herself cornered by Mrs. Hendricks. "Miss Carson," the housekeeper said in a low voice, "may I have a word?" Intrigued by the older woman's serious tone, Emily nodded, following her to a quiet corner of the room. "I couldn't help but notice," Mrs. Hendricks began, her eyes sharp and knowing, "the way Mr. Blackwood looks at you, and the way you look at him." Emily felt her cheeks flush. "Mrs. Hendricks, The housekeeper held up a hand, cutting off Emily's stammered response. "I've worked for this family for many years, Miss Carson. I've seen the darkness that fell over this house after Mrs. Blackwood's passing, and I've seen the light you've brought back into it." She paused, her expression softening. "But I feel I must warn you. The road you're contemplating, it won't be an easy one." Emily swallowed hard, torn between embarrassment at having her feelings so plainly seen and gratitude for the older woman's concern. "I know it's complicated," she admitted softly. "I would never do anything to hurt the girls or to jeopardize my position here." Mrs. Hendricks nodded approvingly. "I believe you, my dear. Just be careful. Hearts are fragile things, especially young ones." With a final knowing look, the housekeeper moved away, leaving Emily to her swirling thoughts. Later that evening, after the girls had been put to bed with extra hugs and reassurances about their father's impending trip, Emily found herself once again in Alexander's study. The sense of déjà vu was strong as she stood before his desk, remembering their interrupted conversation from a few nights before. "Emily," Alexander began, his voice low and intense, "I wanted to thank you again for everything you've done, everything you continue to do for this family. I know this new development, my having to travel, it's not ideal." Emily nodded, trying to keep her voice steady as she replied, "We'll manage. The girls understand you're doing what's necessary to secure their future." Alexander stood, moving around the desk to stand closer to her. "It's not just the girls I'm worried about," he admitted. "Emily, what we talked about before. My feelings for you, they haven't changed. If anything, they've grown stronger." Emily's heart raced, a mix of joy and trepidation flooding through her. "Alexander," she breathed, "I care for you too, so much. But this, us, it's complicated. The girls, the staff, your position." "I know," he said, reaching out to take her hand. "I know it won't be easy. But Emily, I'm willing to face whatever challenges come our way, if you are." As they stood there, hands clasped, eyes locked, Emily felt as though she was standing on the precipice of a new life, a life filled with love, family, and yes, complications, but also a life of possibility, of joy, of the kind of deep connection she had thought lost to her forever. "Yes," she whispered, her voice strong despite its softness. "Yes, I'm willing." As Alexander drew her into an embrace, their lips meeting in a kiss that felt like coming home, Emily knew that their journey was just beginning. There would be obstacles to overcome, doubts to quell, a delicate balance to maintain between their personal happiness and the needs of the family. But in that moment, held in the arms of the man she loved, surrounded by the warmth of the home they had built together, Emily felt ready to face whatever the future might hold, for herself, for Alexander, and for the three precious girls who had stolen her heart. The new horizon before them was bright with promise, and together they would step into it, hand in hand, ready to write the next chapter of their unconventional, beautiful love story. The week leading up to Alexander's departure for New York was a whirlwind of activity and emotion. Emily found herself caught in a delicate balancing act, navigating her evolving relationship with Alexander, while maintaining her role as caregiver to the girls and managing the household's day-to-day operations. The morning after their conversation in the study, Emily woke to find a single rose on her nightstand, accompanied by a note in Alexander's elegant handwriting, "For new beginnings." Eh? The gesture brought a smile to her face, even as a flutter of nervousness settled in her stomach. How would they navigate this new dynamic, especially with Alexander's impending trip? As she made her way downstairs, Emily overheard hushed voices coming from the kitchen. She paused outside the door, recognizing Mrs. Hendricks's stern tone. "Must be discreet," the housekeeper was saying. "The children don't need any more upheaval in their lives." "But it's so romantic," came the excited whisper of Sarah, one of the younger maids. "Mr. Blackwood and Miss Carson, finding love after everything that's happened." Emily felt her cheeks flush, realizing that her relationship with Alexander was already the subject of staff gossip. She took a deep breath, steeling herself before entering the kitchen as if she hadn't heard a thing. "Good morning," she said brightly, pretending not to notice the way Mrs. Hendricks and Sarah jumped slightly at her entrance. "Good morning, Miss Carson," Mrs. Hendricks replied, her composure quickly regained. "I trust you slept well?" As she typed out a reply, Emily felt a mix of emotions wash over her. Joy at this new chapter in her life, anxiety about the challenges ahead, and a deep, abiding love for the family that had become her own. Whatever the coming weeks might bring, Emily knew that she and Alexander would face it together, united in their love for each other and for the three precious girls who had brought them together. The road ahead might not be easy, but with love, patience, and understanding, they would navigate it as a family. The first week of Alexander's absence passed in a blur of activity. Emily threw herself into maintaining a sense of normalcy for the girls, filling their days with engaging activities and comforting routines. The welcome home countdown calendar they had created became a focal point of their mornings, each day bringing a small treat or activity as they marked off another day until their father's return. Despite her best efforts, Emily couldn't help but notice the subtle changes in the girls' behavior. Lily, usually the most outgoing of the three, had become more subdued, often seeking out quiet corners to read or draw. Rose, on the other hand, seemed to channel her emotions into her art, producing a series of vibrant paintings that spoke volumes about her inner turmoil. Violet, always the most sensitive, clung to Emily more than usual, as if afraid she too might disappear. One evening, as Emily was tucking the girls into bed, Lily asked a question that caught her off guard. "Miss Emily," she began hesitantly, "are you and Daddy in love?" Emily felt her heart skip a beat. She had known this conversation was coming, but she and Alexander had agreed to wait until his return to discuss their relationship with the girls. Now, faced with Lily's direct question and the expectant faces of Rose and Violet, Emily found herself at a crossroads. Taking a deep breath, she sat on the edge of Lily's bed, gathering her thoughts. "Your daddy and I care about each other very much," she said carefully. "And we both love you girls more than anything in the world. But grown-up relationships can be complicated. Why do you ask, sweetheart?" Lily shrugged, her eyes downcast. "I saw you kissing in the garden before he left. Like in the movies." Emily felt a blush creep up her cheeks, realizing they hadn't been as discreet as they'd thought. "I see," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Girls, your daddy and I have become very close, but we're still figuring things out. When he comes home, we'll all sit down together and talk about it, okay? For now, just know that nothing will change how much we all love you." The girls seemed to accept this, though Emily could see the wheels turning in their young minds. As she kissed them goodnight and turned out the light, she couldn't shake the feeling that a significant shift had occurred. Later that night, during their nightly video call, Emily shared the conversation with Alexander. His face on the screen looked tired, but his eyes softened as she recounted the girls' questions. "I'm sorry you had to handle that on your own," he said, running a hand through his hair. "Maybe we should have talked to them before I left." Emily shook her head. "We agreed it was better to wait. They're processing a lot right now with your absence. We'll handle it together when you return." Alexander nodded. Then his expression grew more serious. "Speaking of my return, there's something we need to discuss. The negotiations here are going well, better than expected actually, but they want me to stay on for an additional 2 weeks to finalize the deal." Emily felt her heart sink. 2 more weeks. She could see the conflict in Alexander's eyes, knew he was torn between his professional responsibilities and his desire to be home with his family. "The girls will be disappointed," she said softly. "I know," Alexander sighed. "I hate the thought of being away for so long, but this deal, and Emily, it could secure the company's future for years to come. It would mean stability for the girls, for all of us." Emily nodded, understanding the weight of the decision. "We'll manage," she assured him. "The girls are resilient, and we'll find ways to keep your presence felt, even from a distance." As they ended the call, Emily's mind was already working on how to break the news to the girls and how to make the extended separation easier for everyone. The next morning, as they gathered around the breakfast table, Emily steeled herself for the conversation ahead. "Girls," she began gently, "I have some news from your father. The important work he's doing in New York is going very well, but it means he needs to stay a little longer than we expected." The reaction was immediate. Lily's face fell, Rose's lower lip began to tremble, and Violet's eyes filled with tears. "But he promised he'd be back soon," Violet said, her voice quivering. Emily's heart ached at the pain in their voices. "I know, sweetheart. Your daddy wishes he could be here with us, but what he's doing is very important for your future. And we're going to make sure he still feels close to us, even from far away." Over the next few days, Emily worked tirelessly to keep the girls' spirits up. They added extra days to their countdown calendar, each one featuring a new activity or surprise. They started a daily journal to share with Alexander, filling it with drawings, stories, and little mementos of their days. Emily even arranged for a large world map to be hung in the playroom, where they could track Alexander's travels and learn about the places he visited. Despite these efforts, Emily couldn't help but feel the strain of Alexander's absence. The stolen moments they had shared before his departure had awakened feelings she had long thought dormant. Now, with only nightly video calls and text messages to sustain their budding relationship, she found herself grappling with doubts and insecurities. One afternoon, as Emily was helping Mrs. Hendricks with some household tasks, the older woman fixed her with a knowing look. "You're worried about Mr. Blackwood's extended stay, aren't you?" she asked, her tone gentle but probing. Emily sighed, knowing there was no point in denying it to the perceptive housekeeper. "I am," she admitted. "Not just for the girls, but for us. This relationship is so new, and already we're facing such a long separation." Mrs. Hendricks nodded sagely. "Distance can be a true test of a relationship," she said, "but it can also strengthen it if you let it. Use this time to really get to know each other, beyond the physical attraction and the day-to-day interactions." Emily took the housekeeper's words to heart. That night, during their call, she and Alexander delved deeper into conversation than they ever had before. They shared stories from their pasts, their hopes for the future, their fears and dreams. As the days passed, Emily found that despite the physical distance, she felt closer to Alexander than ever. Meanwhile, life at the Blackwood mansion continued its steady rhythm. Emily focused on creating positive experiences for the girls, organizing special outings and projects to keep their minds engaged and their hearts light. She was particularly proud of the community volunteer day she arranged, where the girls helped at a local animal shelter. Seeing the joy on their faces as they played with the animals and the sense of accomplishment they felt in helping others warmed Emily's heart. As the second week of Alexander's extended stay drew to a close, Emily began to sense a shift in the household. The girls, while still missing their father, had adapted to the new routine. They threw themselves into their schoolwork and activities with renewed vigor, eager to have accomplishments to share with Alexander upon his return. Emily, too, found herself settling into a new rhythm. The initial pangs of longing for Alexander's presence had mellowed into a steady warmth, fueled by their nightly conversations and the knowledge that their reunion was drawing closer. One evening, as Emily sat on the terrace watching the sunset, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. From a homeless woman with nothing but her determination to rebuild her life, to a cherished caregiver and potential life partner to one of the city's most prominent businessmen. The path had been far from smooth, but as she thought of the 3 little girls sleeping upstairs and the man working tirelessly across the country to secure their future, Emily knew she wouldn't change a thing. Her phone buzzed with a text from Alexander. "One more week. Can't wait to hold you and the girls in my arms, love, eh?" Emily smiled, her heart full of love and anticipation. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she knew they would face them together, as a family. The day of Alexander's return dawned bright and clear, as if nature itself was celebrating the reunion of the Blackwood family. Emily woke early, her stomach fluttering with a mixture of excitement and nerves. Today wasn't just about Alexander coming home. It was about taking the next step in their relationship and officially introducing the change to the girls. As she helped Lily, Rose, and Violet get ready for the day, Emily couldn't help but notice their barely contained excitement. The girls chatted happily as they dressed in their favorite outfits, eager to look their best for their father's return. "Do you think Daddy will like the surprise we made for him?" Violet asked, her eyes wide with anticipation. Emily smiled, remembering the elaborate welcome home banner the girls had spent days creating. "He's going to love it," she assured them. "Your dad misses you all so much. Everything you've done to welcome him home will mean the world to him." As the morning progressed, the entire household buzzed with activity. Mrs. Hendricks oversaw the preparation of Alexander's favorite meal, while the rest of the staff ensured every corner of the mansion was spotless. Emily found herself constantly checking her phone, tracking Alexander's flight, and counting down the minutes until his arrival. Finally, the sound of a car pulling up the driveway sent a ripple of excitement through the house. The girls, who had been patiently, or not so patiently, waiting in the foyer, began to bounce with anticipation. "Remember," Emily reminded them gently, "your dad might be tired from his long trip. Let's give him a calm, warm welcome, okay?" The girls nodded, but their barely contained energy belied their agreement. As the front door opened, all thoughts of a calm welcome flew out the window. "Daddy!" the triplets cried in unison, rushing forward to engulf Alexander in a group hug. Alexander dropped his bags, kneeling to gather his daughters in his arms. "Oh, my darlings," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I've missed you so much." Emily hung back, allowing the family their moment of reunion. But as Alexander stood, his eyes met hers over the girls' heads, and the look they shared was filled with warmth, love, and promise. "Welcome home," Emily said softly, stepping forward. Alexander reached out, taking her hand in his. "It's good to be home," he replied, his voice carrying a weight of meaning that wasn't lost on anyone in the room. The rest of the day was a whirlwind of activity. The girls eagerly showed their father all the projects they had worked on during his absence, from art pieces to the journal they had kept for him. Alexander listened attentively, his face alight with pride and love for his daughters. As evening approached, Emily could sense Alexander's growing fatigue despite his efforts to hide it. After dinner, as the girls were engrossed in a movie in the family room, she gently suggested that perhaps it was time for Alexander to get some rest. "You're right," he admitted with a rueful smile, "but there's something we need to do first." He glanced meaningfully towards the family room, where the girls were curled up on the couch. Emily nodded, understanding. It was time for the conversation they had been preparing for. Together they entered the family room. Alexander picked up the remote, pausing the movie. "Girls," he said, his voice gentle but serious, "there's something Miss Emily and I would like to talk to you about." The triplets looked up, curiosity evident on their faces, as they took in the sight of their father and Emily standing side by side, hands clasped. Alexander took a deep breath before continuing. "You know that Miss Emily has become very important to our family. She takes wonderful care of you, and she's brought so much happiness into our lives." The girls nodded, their eyes darting between their father and Emily. "Well," Alexander went on, "Miss Emily has also become very important to me. In fact, We've realized that we care for each other very much, as more than just friends." There was a moment of silence as the girls processed this information. Then Lily, ever the spokesperson for her sisters, asked, "Does this mean Miss Emily is going to be our new mommy?" Emily felt her heart skip a beat at the directness of the question. She knelt down, bringing herself to eye level with the girls. "Your mommy will always be your mommy," she said softly. "No one could ever replace her. But if it's okay with you, I'd like to be part of your family in a different way. I love you girls and I love your dad. We want to build a life together, with all of you." The girls exchanged glances, seeming to have a silent conversation among themselves. Finally, Rose spoke up. "Does this mean you'll stay with us forever?" Emily felt tears prick at her eyes. "If that's what you want, yes. I'd love nothing more than to be with you all forever." There was another moment of silence, and then suddenly Emily found herself engulfed in a group hug, 3 pairs of small arms wrapping tightly around her. She felt Alexander join the embrace, his strong arms encircling all of them. As they sat together on the couch, the girls peppering them with questions about what this meant for their future, Emily felt a sense of rightness settle over her. This was what family meant: love, acceptance, and the promise of a shared future. Later that night, after the girls had been tucked into bed with extra hugs and kisses, Emily and Alexander stood on the terrace, looking out over the moonlit garden. "That went better than I could have hoped," Alexander said softly, pulling Emily close. She nodded, leaning into his embrace. "They're remarkable children. So open-hearted and loving, just like their mother," Alexander murmured, a hint of old pain in his voice. Then he turned to face Emily, his eyes shining with emotion. "And now they have you, bringing even more love into their lives, into all our lives." As they stood there, the cool night air swirling around them, Emily felt as though she was standing on the threshold of a new life. There would be challenges ahead, she knew. Blending families was never easy, and they still had a long road ahead of them. But looking into Alexander's eyes, feeling the love that surrounded them, Emily knew that together they could face anything. "I love you," she whispered, the words feeling both momentous and utterly natural. "I love you too," Alexander replied, drawing her in for a kiss that felt like a promise, a new beginning. As they made their way back inside, hand in hand, Emily's heart was full to bursting. From the depths of loss and hardship, she had found not just a job or a home, but a family, a purpose and a love she had never dared to dream of. Whatever the future held, she knew that this family, this love, was where she belonged. The weeks following Alexander's return and the official announcement of his relationship with Emily brought a whirlwind of changes to the Blackwood household. While the initial reaction from the girls had been positive, the reality of their new family dynamic began to settle in, bringing with it a host of unexpected challenges and emotions. One sunny Saturday morning, as Emily was helping Rose tend to their small garden patch, she noticed the little girl seemed unusually quiet. "Is everything all right, sweetheart?" Emily asked gently, setting down her trowel. Rose hesitated, her small fingers playing with a blade of grass. "Miss Emily," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, "if you and Daddy get married, do we have to call you Mom?" The question caught Emily off guard. She took a moment to gather her thoughts before responding. "Oh, Rose," she said softly, "you don't have to call me anything you're not comfortable with. I'm not here to replace your mum. I'm here to add more love to your life, not to take anyone's place." Rose nodded, seeming to mull this over. "I'm glad you're here," she said finally. "But sometimes I feel bad for being happy when Mom isn't here." Emily felt her heart constrict at the child's words. She gathered Rose into a gentle hug. "It's okay to be happy, sweetheart. Your mom would want that for you. We can be happy and still miss her and love her very much." As they continued their gardening, Emily's mind raced. She realized that while the girls had seemed to accept the new situation easily, there were deeper emotions at play that needed to be addressed. That evening, Emily shared her concerns with Alexander as they sat in his study after the girls had gone to bed. "I think we need to be more proactive about helping the girls process all these changes," she said. "So they're happy, but there's also confusion and some guilt." Alexander nodded, his brow furrowed in concern. "You're right. Perhaps we should consider family counseling, someone who specializes in blended families and grief in children." Emily felt a wave of relief at his suggestion. I think that's an excellent idea. It would give the girls a safe space to express their feelings and help us navigate this transition. As they discussed the details, there was a soft knock at the study door. They turned to see Lily standing in the doorway, her favorite stuffed animal clutched tightly to her chest. "Sweetheart, what are you doing up?" Alexander asked, moving to kneel in front of his daughter. "I had a bad dream," Lily mumbled, her lower lip trembling. Emily watched as Alexander scooped Lily into his arms, carrying her to the couch where they had been sitting. As he settled her between them, Emily was struck by how natural it felt, the three of them together like this. "Do you want to talk about your dream?" Emily asked softly. Lily shook her head, burying her face in her father's chest. But after a moment she spoke, her voice muffled. "I dreamed that you left us, like Mommy did." Emily and Alexander exchanged a pained look over Lily's head. This was exactly the kind of fear they needed to address. "Oh, my darling," Alexander said, his voice thick with emotion, "Emily isn't going anywhere. We're a family now." "That's right," Emily added, gently stroking Lily's hair. "I love you and your sisters and your dad very much. We're in this together, for always." As they sat there, comforting Lily until she fell asleep, Emily and Alexander silently reaffirmed their commitment to helping their family through this transition. The next few weeks brought a flurry of activity as they began family counseling sessions and worked on establishing new routines that incorporated their changed dynamics. The girls started referring to Emily as M, a compromise that felt comfortable for everyone, acknowledging her important place in their lives without the pressure of a maternal title. However, just as they were beginning to find their footing, a new challenge arose. One afternoon, as Emily was reviewing some household accounts in the kitchen, Mrs. Hendricks approached her with a concerned expression. "Miss Carson," the housekeeper began, her voice low, "there's something you should know. I've overheard some unsavory gossip in town about you and Mr. Blackwood." Emily felt her stomach drop. "What kind of gossip?" she asked, dreading the answer. Mrs. Hendricks looked uncomfortable but pressed on. "There are rumors circulating about your background. Some people are suggesting that that you've manipulated your way into the family for financial gain." Emily felt as though she'd been doused with cold water. She had known that there might be some raised eyebrows about her relationship with Alexander, given their different backgrounds, but she hadn't anticipated such malicious speculation. "Thank you for telling me, Mrs. Hendricks," she managed to say, her mind whirling. As the housekeeper left, Emily sank into a chair, her thoughts in turmoil. She and Alexander had been so focused on the girls and their immediate family that they hadn't fully considered how their relationship might be perceived by the outside world. That evening, after sharing the disturbing news with Alexander, they sat in his study, trying to decide how to handle the situation. "I don't care what anyone thinks," Alexander said firmly, his jaw set in anger. "We know the truth of our relationship." Emily sighed, running a hand through her hair. "I care about how it might affect the girls," she said. "They're going to hear these rumors eventually. And what about your business? Could this kind of talk harm your reputation?" Alexander's expression softened as he took Emily's hand. "We'll face this together," he assured her. "We have nothing to be ashamed of. Our love is real, and that's all that matters." As they discussed strategies for addressing the rumors and protecting their family, Emily couldn't shake a nagging sense of guilt. Her past, the circumstances that had led to her homelessness, the struggles she had faced, was something she had shared with Alexander, but had kept largely private. Now, with these rumors swirling, she wondered if it was time to be more open about her journey. "Maybe," she said slowly, "it's time for me to share my story. Not just with you and the girls, but more publicly, to show that I'm not ashamed of where I've come from, and that it's possible to rebuild your life with determination and support." Alexander looked at her with a mixture of admiration and concern. "Are you sure? You don't owe anyone an explanation." Emily nodded, feeling a sense of resolve settle over her. "I'm sure. If my story can help change perceptions, and maybe even inspire others who are struggling, then some good can come from this situation." As they began to formulate a plan, a carefully crafted statement to be released to the press, a more detailed conversation with the girls about Emily's background, and a commitment to living their truth openly and without shame, Emily felt a renewed sense of purpose. This challenge, like the others they had faced, would only serve to make their unconventional family stronger. As she looked at Alexander, Seeing the love and support shining in his eyes, Emily knew that together they could weather any storm. The road ahead might be rocky, but with love, honesty, and determination, the Blackwood family would face it head-on, growing stronger and closer with each obstacle they overcame. The decision to share Emily's story publicly was not one taken lightly. In the days following their conversation, Emily and Alexander worked closely with a public relations team to craft a statement that would be both honest and protective of their family's privacy. But before they could release anything to the media, there was a more important audience they needed to address: the girls. On a quiet Sunday afternoon, Emily and Alexander gathered Lily, Rose, and Violet in the cozy family room. The girls, sensing the seriousness of the moment, sat quietly on the plush carpet, their wide eyes moving between Emily and their father. "Girls," Alexander began, his voice gentle but firm, "we want to talk to you about something important. It's about Emily's life before she came to live with us." Emily took a deep breath, steeling herself for the conversation ahead. She had always been honest with the girls, but she had spared them the harsher details of her past. Now, it was time for the full truth. "You know that before I came here, I didn't have a home," Emily began, her voice soft but steady. "But there's more to the story that I think you're old enough to understand now." Over the next hour, Emily shared her story with the girls. She told them about her life as a teacher, her marriage to a man who turned out to be unfaithful, and the tragic accident that took her son's life. She explained how grief and financial troubles had led to her losing her home, and how she had struggled to survive on the streets. As she spoke, Emily watched the girls' faces carefully, ready to stop if it became too much. But they listened with rapt attention, their expressions a mixture of sadness, concern, and growing understanding. "But why didn't you ask for help?" Violet asked, her voice small and confused. Emily smiled sadly. "Sometimes when we're hurting very badly, it's hard to reach out. We feel ashamed or scared. But I've learned that asking for help is actually a sign of strength, not weakness." Alexander, who had been sitting quietly beside Emily, his hand a comforting presence on her back, spoke up. "That's why we're telling you this now," he said. "Because there are people saying unkind things about Emily, and we want you to know the truth." "Are people being mean to you, Em?" Lily asked, her little face scrunching up in indignation. Emily reached out to smooth Lily's hair. "Some people don't understand our family," she explained gently. "They're saying things that aren't true because they don't know the whole story. That's why we've decided to share my story with everyone." Rose, who had been quietly absorbing everything, suddenly stood up and wrapped her arms around Emily. "I'm glad you're here now," she said firmly. "You're part of our family and we love you." Tears pricked at Emily's eyes as Lily and Violet joined the hug. She met Alexander's gaze over the girls' heads, seeing her own emotion reflected in his eyes. The next morning, as the carefully crafted statement was released to the press, Emily braced herself for the public reaction. She busied herself with the girls' homeschooling, trying to maintain a sense of normalcy, even as her phone buzzed constantly with notifications. It was mid-afternoon when Alexander burst into the sunroom, where Emily was helping the girls with an art project. His face was flushed with excitement. "Emily," he said, slightly out of breath, "you need to see this." He handed her his tablet, open to a major news website. The headline read, "From Homeless to Homemaker, the inspiring journey of Emily Carson." As Emily scanned the article, she felt a wave of emotion wash over her. The piece was surprisingly sympathetic, praising her resilience and the Blackwood family's openness. It highlighted the issue of homelessness and the importance of second chances. But it was the comments section that truly caught Emily's attention. Message after message of support poured in. "What an inspiring story. Emily Carson is a true example of perseverance. The Blackwoods show us what real family values look like: love and acceptance for all. As someone who's faced homelessness, this gives me hope. Thank you for sharing your story, Emily." As Emily read, tears began to stream down her face. Alexander wrapped an arm around her, pulling her close. "You did it," he whispered. "You turned this situation into something positive." The girls, curious about the commotion, gathered around. As Emily and Alexander explained the public's reaction, their faces lit up with pride. "See? I told you people would understand once they knew the truth," Lily said, her chest puffed out with satisfaction. In the days that followed, the family was inundated with messages of support. Local charities reached out, asking Emily to share her story at fundraising events. A publisher contacted her about the possibility of writing a memoir, but with the increased attention came new challenges. Paparazzi began to stake out the Blackwood estate, hoping to catch a glimpse of the family. Emily found herself hesitating to take the girls out in public, wary of the attention they might attract. One evening, as she and Alexander discussed the situation in his study, there was a soft knock at the door. Mrs. Hendricks entered, her usually stern face softened with concern. "Mr. Blackwood, Miss Carson," she began. "I hope you'll forgive me for interrupting, but I felt I needed to speak with you." "Of course, Mrs. Hendricks," Alexander said, gesturing for her to continue. The housekeeper took a deep breath. "I want you to know that the staff, well, we're all behind you, 100%. If there's anything we can do to help shield the family from this increased attention, you only need to ask." Emily felt a lump form in her throat at the unexpected show of support. "Thank you, Mrs. Hendricks," she managed. "That means more than you know." As Mrs. Hendricks left, Emily turned to Alexander. "We are so fortunate," she said softly, "to have such support, such love surrounding us." Alexander nodded, pulling her close. "We've built something special here," he agreed, "and we'll protect it no matter what challenges come our way." As they sat there, wrapped in each other's arms, Emily felt a sense of peace settle over her. The road ahead might not be easy, but they would face it together, as a family. She thought back to the day Alexander had offered her a job, how lost and alone she had felt. Now, surrounded by love and acceptance, she knew she had found not just a home, but a true belonging. Whatever the future held, whether it was book deals or charity events, continued media scrutiny, or new family adventures, Emily knew that they would face it head-on, with the strength and love of their unconventional, beautiful family behind them. As the sun set outside the study window, casting a warm glow over the room, Emily allowed herself a moment to simply be grateful for second chances, for unexpected love, and for the beautiful family she now called her own. The weeks following the public release of Emily's story brought a whirlwind of change to the Blackwood household. What had once been a private sanctuary now felt like it was under constant scrutiny. The family's every move seemed to be of interest to the media and the public, bringing both opportunities and challenges they had never anticipated. Emily found herself juggling her responsibilities to the girls with an increasing number of public appearances and interviews. She had become, almost overnight, a symbol of resilience and hope for many. While she was grateful for the opportunity to inspire others, the constant demands on her time and energy were beginning to take their toll. One morning, as Emily was preparing for yet another interview, she noticed Violet lingering in the doorway of her room, a worried expression on her small face. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" Emily asked, pausing in her preparations. Violet hesitated before speaking. "Are you going away again?" The question hit Emily like a punch to the gut. She realized that her increased absences, while for a good cause, were affecting the girls more than she had realized. Kneeling down to Violet's level, Emily pulled her into a gentle hug. "I'm just going out for a little while, honey. I'll be back this afternoon, I promise." Violet nodded, but her eyes remained troubled. "It's just, you're gone a lot now, like Daddy used to be." Emily felt a pang of guilt at the comparison. She and Alexander had worked so hard to create a stable, present environment for the girls, and now it felt like they were slipping back into old patterns. "I'm sorry, Violet," Emily said softly. "Oh, you're right. I have been away more lately. How about we plan a special day, just the 5 of us? No interviews, no work, just family time." Violet's face lit up at the suggestion, and Emily made a mental note to discuss scaling back their public commitments with Alexander. Later that day, as Emily sat in the green room of a local talk show, her phone buzzed with a text from Alexander. "Saw your interview this morning. You were amazing, but the girls are asking when you'll be home. Miss you. Love, A." Emily felt a mixture of pride and guilt wash over her. She was making a difference, sharing her story and raising awareness about homelessness and second chances. But at what cost to her family? As she was mulling this over, the show's producer poked her head in. "Ms. Carson, we're ready for you." Taking a deep breath, Emily plastered on a smile and followed the producer to the set. As the lights came up and the host began the introduction, Emily found herself speaking almost on autopilot, sharing the now familiar beats of her story. But when the host asked about the impact of her newfound fame on her family, Emily paused. In that moment of hesitation, she made a decision. "You know," she began, her voice soft but clear, "I'm incredibly grateful for the opportunity to share my story and hopefully inspire others. But the truth is, the most important part of my journey is the family I've found. And I think in all of this excitement, I've been in danger of losing sight of that." The host leaned in, intrigued by this unscripted moment of vulnerability. "What do you mean?" Emily smiled, thinking of Violet's worried face that morning. "I mean that while it's important to use our experiences to help others, it's equally important to be present for the people who matter most. My girls, and yes, I call them my girls now, they need me. They've already lost one mother. I won't let them feel like they're losing another." As she finished the interview, declining several offers for future appearances, Emily felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She had needed this reminder of what truly mattered. Arriving home that afternoon, Emily was greeted by the sight of Alexander and the girls in the kitchen, flour covering every surface as they attempted to bake cookies. "Em!" Lily cried, running to hug her, leaving floury handprints on Emily's dress. "You're home early," Emily laughed, scooping Lily up and planting a kiss on her flour-dusted cheek. "I am. And I'm thinking it's time we had that family day we talked about, Violet. What do you all say to a picnic in the garden?" The girls cheered, and Alexander raised an eyebrow, a question in his eyes. Emily mouthed later to him, promising a fuller explanation when they had a moment alone. As they spread out a blanket in the lush garden, the warm sun on their faces and the sound of the girls' laughter filling the air, Emily felt a sense of peace settle over her. This was what mattered. These moments, this family. That evening, after the girls had been tucked into bed, Emily and Alexander sat on the terrace, glasses of wine in hand. "So," Alexander began, "want to tell me what brought on this sudden change of heart about your public appearances?" Emily sighed, leaning into his side. "Violet said something this morning that really hit home. She compared my absences to how you used to be, always working. It made me realize we were falling into the same trap, just for a different reason." Alexander was quiet for a moment, his arm tightening around her. "You're right," he said finally. "I've been so proud of you, watching you share your story and inspire others, but I've been ignoring the impact on our family." "We both have," Emily acknowledged. "I think we got caught up in the excitement of it all. But Alexander, the girls have to come first, always." He nodded, pressing a kiss to her temple. "So what do we do? Your story is important, Emily. It's making a real difference." Emily smiled, an idea forming. "What if we found a way to make a difference that doesn't take us away from the girls so much? Maybe start a foundation, focusing on helping homeless families get back on their feet. We could do a lot of the work from home, involve the girls in age-appropriate ways." Alexander's face lit up with enthusiasm. "That's brilliant, Emily. We could use my business connections, your first-hand experience. We could really make a lasting impact." As they sat there planning their new venture, Emily felt a renewed sense of purpose. They would find a way to balance their desire to help others with their commitment to their family. It wouldn't always be easy, but together they could make it work. The spotlight might still shine on their family from time to time, but they would face it together, on their own terms. Their love, their bond, would always come first. As the stars twinkled overhead and the soft night breeze carried the scent of blooming flowers, Emily and Alexander sealed their new plan with a kiss. The road ahead might have its challenges, but with love, understanding, and a shared vision, they were ready to face whatever came their way. Their unconventional family had weathered storms before. This new chapter would be no different. Together, they would find their balance, make their mark on the world, and most importantly, cherish every moment with the precious family they had built. The Blackwood family's decision to start a foundation marked the beginning of a new chapter in their lives. The dining room, once a formal space used only for special occasions, had been transformed into a makeshift office. Blueprints and proposal drafts covered the antique mahogany table, while a whiteboard filled with ideas and flowcharts stood where a priceless painting once hung. Emily and Alexander sat at the head of the table, surrounded by a small team of advisors they had brought on to help launch the Blackwood Second Chance Foundation. The air buzzed with excitement and purpose as they hashed out the details of their first major initiative. I think we should focus on family housing first, Emily was saying, her eyes bright with passion. From my experience, keeping families together is crucial for recovery and reintegration. Alexander nodded, making notes on his tablet. Agreed. We can use some of the properties from my real estate holdings as a starting point. We'll need to renovate them to be suitable for family living, of course. As they continued their discussion, a small face peered around the doorframe. Violet, always the most curious of the triplets, had been drawn by the sound of animated voices. Emily noticed her first. "Violet, sweetheart, come on in. Would you like to see what we're working on?" Violet nodded shyly, padding into the room in her sock feet. Alexander scooped her up, settling her on his lap so she could see the table. "We're planning how to help families who don't have homes," he explained gently. "Just like Emily didn't have a home before she came to live with us." Violet's eyes widened with understanding. "Can I help?" she asked, her voice small but eager. Emily and Alexander exchanged a glance, a silent conversation passing between them. They had discussed involving the girls in the Foundation's work, but hadn't quite figured out how to do so in an age-appropriate way. "You know what, Violet? I think you can," Emily said, an idea forming. "How would you like to help design the bedrooms for the children we'll be helping?" Violet's face lit up with excitement. "Can I pick the colors?" "And the toys?" Alexander chuckled, pressing a kiss to his daughter's head. "That sounds like a wonderful idea. Why don't you go get your sisters? I bet they'd like to help too." As Violet scampered off to find Lily and Rose, one of the advisors leaned forward. "Are you sure about this, Mr. Blackwood?" Involving the children in such a complex project, Alexander held up a hand, silencing the concern. "Our family is at the heart of this foundation. Involving the girls isn't just about them helping. It's about teaching them the value of giving back, of using our privileges to help others. This is part of the legacy we want to build." Emily felt a surge of love and pride for Alexander in that moment. His growth from the distant, work-focused man she had first met to this engaged, passionate father never ceased to amaze her. Soon the dining room was filled with the excited chatter of 3 little girls, their imaginations running wild, with ideas for creating welcoming spaces for children who had lost their homes. Emily and Alexander guided them gently, helping them understand the practical considerations while encouraging their creativity. As the day wore on, the Foundation's plans began to take shape. They would start with renovating a small apartment complex, turning it into transitional housing for families working to get back on their feet. The Blackwood girls' designs would be incorporated into the children's spaces, adding a touch of warmth and whimsy to the project. That evening, as Emily tucked the girls into bed, she could sense their excitement about being involved in the Foundation's work. Lily said, her voice serious despite her yawn. "Do you think the kids will like the rooms we designed?" Emily smiled, smoothing Lily's hair back from her forehead. "I think they'll love them, sweetheart. You girls have put so much thought and love into those designs. That's going to mean a lot to the families we help." Rose piped up from her bed. "Can we meet the families? Maybe play with the kids when they move in?" Emily hesitated, knowing they needed to be careful about privacy and boundaries. "We'll have to see, Rose. Some of the families might need time to settle in first. But I promise we'll find ways for you to be involved that are comfortable for everyone." As she turned out the light and left the girls' room, Emily found Alexander waiting in the hallway, a soft smile on his face. "You heard?" she asked, leaning into him as they walked towards their bedroom. He nodded, wrapping an arm around her waist. "We're doing the right thing, Emily. Not just with the Foundation, but with involving the girls. Seeing their enthusiasm, their genuine desire to help, it's incredible." Emily agreed, her heart full of love for their family and hope for the future they were building. "It's not going to be easy," she mused. "Balancing the Foundation work with family time, making sure the girls don't feel overwhelmed. But it's worth it," Alexander finished for her. "We're not just changing lives out there. We're shaping our girls into compassionate, socially conscious young women." As they prepared for bed, Emily's mind whirled with plans and possibilities. The Foundation was still in its infancy, but she could already see the potential for real, lasting change. And more than that, she could see how it was bringing their family closer together, united in a common purpose. Lying in bed that night, Alexander's arm draped protectively over her, Emily reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. From homelessness and despair to not only finding a loving family, but also being in a position to help others who were struggling as she once had. It felt like a dream, but the warmth of Alexander beside her and the memory of the girls' excited faces reminded her that it was beautifully, incredibly real. As she drifted off to sleep, Emily's last thoughts were of the future they were building, not just for themselves, but for all the families they hoped to help. The Blackwood Second Chance Foundation was more than just a charity. It was a legacy of love, hope, and the unshakable belief in the power of second chances. The road ahead would undoubtedly have its challenges, but Emily knew that together as a family, they could face anything. With love as their foundation and compassion as their guide, the Blackwoods were ready to make their mark on the world, one family at a time. The crisp autumn air carried a sense of anticipation as the Blackwood family stood before the newly renovated apartment complex. What had once been a dilapidated building was now a beacon of hope, its fresh paint and welcoming facade a testament to the power of second chances. Emily squeezed Alexander's hand, her eyes shining with unshed tears of joy. "I can't believe we did it," she whispered. "Our first families move in today." Alexander nodded, his own emotions evident in the slight tremor of his voice. "It's just the beginning, love. But what a beginning it is." Lily, Rose, and Violet fidgeted excitedly beside them, each clutching a bouquet of flowers to present to the new residents. They had been integral to the project, their childish enthusiasm breathing life into every aspect of the renovation. As the first car pulled up, a family of four emerging with wide eyes and tentative smiles, Emily felt a surge of déjà vu. She remembered all too well the mix of hope and fear that came with a new beginning. The mother, a petite woman with tired eyes but a determined set to her jaw, approached them. "Ms. Carson? Mr. Blackwood, I'm Sarah Thompson. We can't thank you enough for this opportunity." Emily stepped forward, enveloping the woman in a warm hug. "Sarah, please call me Emily. We're so glad you're here. This is your fresh start, and we're honored to be a part of it." As the girls presented their flowers and excitedly offered to show the Thompson children to their new rooms, Emily caught Alexander's eye. The pride and love she saw there mirrored her own feelings. The day progressed in a whirlwind of introductions, tours, and heartfelt thank yous. By the time the last family was settled in, Emily felt emotionally drained, but profoundly fulfilled. As they drove home, the girls chatted excitedly in the back seat about the new friends they'd made and the plans they had for future playdates. Emily leaned her head against the window, a contented smile on her face. "Penny, for your thoughts?" Alexander asked, reaching over to take her hand. Emily turned to him, her eyes bright. "I was just thinking about how far we've come. A year ago, I was on the streets, and now we're helping families start over. It's incredible." Alexander brought her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "You're incredible. This was your vision, Emily. You've changed not just our lives, but the lives of so many others." Their moment was interrupted by Violet's small voice from the back seat. Daddy, can we do more? Help more families." Emily turned to look at the girls, her heart swelling with pride at their compassion. "Of course we can, sweetheart. This is just the beginning." However, their euphoria was short-lived. The next morning, as Emily was helping the girls with their homeschooling, Alexander burst into the room, his face tight with worry. "Emily, can I speak with you for a moment?" he asked, his tone carefully controlled. In his study, Alexander handed Emily a tablet open to a local news website. The headline made her blood run cold. "Blackwood Charity Noble Cause or Tax Haven." The article insinuated that the Blackwood Second Chance Foundation was nothing more than an elaborate scheme to avoid taxes and generate positive PR for Alexander's company. It quoted anonymous sources, claiming that the families chosen for the housing project were plants, paid actors meant to tug at heartstrings and open wallets. Emily felt sick as she read, her hands shaking with a mixture of anger and disbelief. How could they say these things? Don't they know how hard we've worked? How much these families need this help? Alexander ran a hand through his hair, his frustration evident. It's a sensationalist piece, looking for scandal where there is none. But the damage... Emily, this could seriously hurt the Foundation's reputation. And worse, it could scare away the families who need our help. As they discussed how to respond to the allegations, a soft knock at the door interrupted them. Mrs. Hendricks entered, her usual stern expression softened with concern. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's something you need to see," she said, turning on the television in Alexander's study. The local news was running a live segment from outside their apartment complex. To Emily and Alexander's horror, they saw reporters accosting the families as they tried to enter or leave the building, shoving microphones in their faces and demanding to know if they were real recipients of the Blackwood charity or paid actors. Emily's heart broke as she saw Sarah Thompson on screen, shielding her children from the cameras, her face a mask of fear and confusion. "We have to do something," Emily said, her voice shaking with emotion. "Those families, they've been through so much already. They don't deserve this." Alexander nodded, already reaching for his phone. "I'll call our PR team, set up a press conference. We need to address these allegations head-on." As they scrambled to respond to the crisis, Emily couldn't help but wonder if this was the universe's way of testing their resolve. They had known that starting the foundation wouldn't be easy, but they hadn't anticipated this level of scrutiny and suspicion. Later that evening, as they prepared for the hastily arranged press conference, Emily felt a tug on her sleeve. She looked down to see Violet, her small face creased with worry. "Em," the little girl asked, "are the bad people going to make our new friends go away?" Emily knelt down, gathering Violet into a tight hug. "No, sweetheart, we won't let that happen. Sometimes when you're doing something good, there are people who don't understand, but we're going to explain everything and it's going to be okay." As she held Violet, Emily made a silent vow. They would weather this storm, not just for themselves, but for the families who were counting on them. The road ahead might be rocky, but with love, truth, and determination on their side, the Blackwoods would prove that their foundation was built on nothing less than genuine compassion and the unshakable belief in second chances. The press conference loomed ahead, a daunting challenge. But as Emily looked at Alexander, saw the resolve in his eyes, and felt the support of their children, she knew they were ready to face whatever came their way. Together, they would fight for their dream, for their family, and for all the families they had promised to help. The lights of the television cameras were blinding as Emily and Alexander stepped up to the podium. The press conference room was packed, a sea of eager reporters and flashing cameras stretching out before them. Emily felt a moment of panic, her throat tightening as she faced the crowd. But then she felt Alexander's reassuring touch on her back, and she drew strength from his presence. "Good evening," Alexander began, his voice steady and clear. "We've called this press conference to address the recent allegations made against the Blackwood Second Chance Foundation. Before we begin, I want to make one thing absolutely clear. Every accusation made against our foundation is categorically false." Emily watched as Alexander methodically dismantled each claim made in the article. He presented financial records, testimonials from reputable charity watchdogs, and a detailed breakdown of how every dollar donated to the foundation was spent. When it was Emily's turn to speak, she took a deep breath, remembering the families they were fighting for. "I stand before you not just as a co-founder of this foundation, but as someone who has walked in the shoes of those we're trying to help," she began, her voice growing stronger with each word. "A year ago, I was homeless. I know the fear, the desperation, the feeling that the world has turned its back on you. The Blackwood Second Chance Foundation was born out of a desire to offer others the same lifeline that was extended to me. These families are not actors. Their struggles are real, their need is genuine, and their gratitude is heartfelt." As Emily spoke, she noticed a shift in the room. The initially skeptical faces of the reporters began to soften, some even nodding in understanding. She shared stories of the families they'd helped, careful to protect their privacy, but painting a vivid picture of the real impact the foundation was having. After the prepared statements, it was time for questions. Emily braced herself, knowing this would be the most challenging part. "Ms. Carson," one reporter called out, "how do you respond to claims that your relationship with Mr. Blackwood is the real reason behind this foundation, that it's all for show?" Emily felt a flash of anger, but she kept her composure. "My relationship with Alexander is separate from our work with the foundation. Yes, it's how we met, and yes, it's part of our story. But the foundation exists because we both believe in the power of second chances. Our personal relationship doesn't negate the real work we're doing or the lives we're changing." Another reporter stood up. "Mr. Blackwood, Isn't it true that your company stands to gain significant tax breaks from this charity work? Alexander nodded, acknowledging the question. It's true that there are tax incentives for charitable giving. That's how the system is designed to encourage philanthropy. But I can assure you, the tax benefits are a fraction of what we're investing in this foundation. This isn't about financial gain. It's about making a real difference in our community. As the press conference continued, Emily and Alexander presented a united front, answering each question with honesty and transparency. They even brought out some of their financial advisors and legal team to address the more technical questions about the foundation's structure and operations. Finally, as the event was wrapping up, Emily made a spontaneous decision. Before we conclude, she said, stepping back up to the microphone, I'd like to extend an invitation to all of you. Come visit our housing complex. Talk to the families. See the work we're doing firsthand. We have nothing to hide and everything to be proud of. The room buzzed with surprised murmurs at this bold move. Alexander shot Emily a questioning look, but then smiled and nodded his agreement. As they left the press conference, both Emily and Alexander felt cautiously optimistic. They had presented their case as strongly and transparently as possible. Now they could only wait to see how the public would respond. Back at home, they found Mrs. Hendricks waiting for them, the girls hovering anxiously nearby. "Well done, both of you," Mrs. Hendricks said, her usual stern expression softened with pride. "The girls and I watched the whole thing. You represented this family and the foundation beautifully." Lily rushed forward, wrapping her arms around Emily's waist. "You were so brave, Em. Those mean reporters didn't scare you at all." Emily chuckled, running her hand through Lily's hair. "Oh, they scared me a little. But knowing we were telling the truth and fighting for something important gave me courage." Rose looked up at her father, her eyes wide. "Daddy, is everything going to be okay now?" Alexander knelt down to his daughter's level. "We hope so, sweetheart. We've done our best to tell the truth and show people the good work we're doing. Now we have to be patient and let that truth speak for itself." As the family settled in for the evening, there was a sense of cautious relief in the air. They had faced the challenge head-on, together. Whatever came next, they would handle it as a unit. Later that night, as Emily and Alexander were preparing for bed, Emily's phone buzzed with a notification. It was an email from Sarah Thompson, the mother they had met on move-in day. "I saw your press conference," Sarah had written. "I want you to know that my family and I are behind you 100%. What you've done for us, for all the families here, it's changed our lives. If there's anything we can do to help set the record straight, just say the word. We're not hiding, and we're not ashamed. We're grateful, and we want the world to know it." Emily showed the email to Alexander, happy tears welling in her eyes. "This is why we do it," she said softly. "This is what matters." Alexander pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "You're right. Whatever happens next, we know we're on the right path." As they drifted off to sleep, Emily felt a renewed sense of purpose. The road ahead might still have its challenges, but they had weathered this storm together. Their foundation, like their family, was built on a solid foundation of love, trust, and the unwavering belief in the power of second chances. No amount of negative press or false accusations could shake that. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to prove the worth of their cause. But for now, wrapped in Alexander's arms, surrounded by the love of their family, Emily knew that they were strong enough to face whatever came their way. The days following the press conference were a whirlwind of activity for the Blackwood family. Emily and Alexander found themselves fielding calls from reporters, charity organizations, and even government officials interested in their work. The tide of public opinion seemed to be turning in their favor, with many praising their transparency and dedication. One morning, as Emily was helping the girls with their homeschooling, Alexander burst into the room, his face alight with excitement. "Emily, girls, you won't believe this," he said, waving a tablet in his hand. "The mayor's office just called. They want to partner with the foundation on a citywide initiative to combat homelessness." The girls cheered, caught up in their father's enthusiasm even if they didn't fully understand the implications. Emily felt a surge of hope and pride. This was exactly the kind of impact they had dreamed of making. As they discussed the potential partnership over lunch, Violet suddenly grew quiet, a thoughtful expression on her face. "What's on your mind, sweetheart?" Emily asked, noticing the little girl's furrowed brow. Violet hesitated before speaking. Daddy? If you help all the homeless people in the city, does that mean you won't need me and Lily and Rose to help anymore? The question caught Emily and Alexander off guard. They exchanged a quick glance before Alexander responded. "Oh, Violet," he said gently, "there will always be people who need help, and there will always be ways for you girls to make a difference. This partnership might help us do more, but it doesn't change the importance of what you contribute." Emily nodded in agreement. "Your ideas, your compassion, your willingness to help others, those are all vital to what we do. The foundation isn't just about your dad and me, it's about our whole family making a difference together." Violet seemed to mull this over before a small smile appeared on her face. "So we can still design rooms and make welcome packages?" "Absolutely," Emily assured her. "In fact, with this new partnership we might be able to help even more families, which means we'll need even more of your creative ideas." The conversation shifted to excited chatter about new projects and ideas, but Emily made a mental note to keep a closer eye on how the girls were processing all the changes in their lives. Later that afternoon, as Emily was reviewing some paperwork for the foundation, she received an unexpected call. The number wasn't one she recognized, but something compelled her to answer. "Hello, is this Emily Carson?" a hesitant voice asked. "Yes, this is she. How can I help you?" There was a pause before the caller continued. "Miss Carson, my name is David Matthews. I used to be your neighbor. Before everything happened to you." Emily felt her heart rate quicken. She remembered David, a kind man who had lived across the hall from her in her old apartment building. He had been one of the few neighbors who had tried to reach out when she was spiraling into depression after losing her son. "David, of course I remember you. How are you?" I'm not doing so well, Emily. That's why I'm calling. I saw you on the news talking about your foundation. I need help." As David poured out his story, job loss, medical bills, an impending eviction, Emily felt a mix of emotions wash over her. Here was a tangible reminder of her past, a connection to the life she had left behind, and now she was in a position to help. "David, I'm so sorry you're going through this, but I'm glad you reached out. We can help. Let me get some information from you and we'll figure out the best way to support you through this." After getting the necessary details and assuring David that someone from the foundation would be in touch soon, Emily ended the call. She sat for a moment, lost in thought, before seeking out Alexander. She found him in his study on a video call with some of the foundation's board members. Seeing her expression, he quickly wrapped up the call. "Emily, what's wrong?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. Emily sank into a chair across from him, still processing the conversation with David. "I just got a call from someone from my old life, a former neighbor. He's about to become homeless." Alexander listened intently as Emily recounted the call and explained her history with David. When she finished, he reached across the desk to take her hand. "This is why we started the foundation, Emily, to help people like David, people who are on the brink of losing everything. What do you think we should do?" Emily squeezed his hand, grateful for his support and understanding. I think this is an opportunity, not just to help David, but to show that homelessness can happen to anyone. That it's not about character flaws or bad decisions, but often just a series of unfortunate events that could happen to any of us." Alexander nodded, a thoughtful expression on his face. "You're right. We could use David's story, with his permission, of course, to put a face to the issue, to help people understand why our work is so important." As they discussed how best to help David and how to incorporate his story into their outreach efforts, Emily felt a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just about running a successful charity anymore. It was about changing perceptions, challenging stereotypes, and showing the world that everyone deserves a second chance. That evening, as the family gathered for dinner, Emily and Alexander shared the story of David with the girls, careful to frame it in a way they could understand. "Girls," Emily began, "remember how we talked about how anyone can fall on hard times? Well, today we heard from someone who needs our help. Someone who knew me before I met your dad, when I was going through my own tough times." The girls listened intently as Emily explained David's situation in simple terms. When she finished, Lily was the first to speak up. "Can we help him, Em? Like you helped us when you first came here?" Emily felt her heart swell with pride at Lily's compassion. "Yes, sweetheart, we're going to help him. And you know what? Your ideas for making people feel welcome are going to be a big part of that." As the conversation continued, filled with the girls' eager suggestions for how to help David and others like him, Emily caught Alexander's eye across the table. The love and pride she saw reflected there matched her own feelings. They had faced challenges, weathered storms, and come out stronger. Now they were poised to make an even bigger impact, not just in their community, but potentially across the city and beyond. As Emily looked around at her family, Alexander, the girls, even Mrs. Hendricks, who was listening from her spot near the kitchen door, she felt a profound sense of gratitude. This was more than she could have ever dreamed of when she was at her lowest point. And now, she had the chance to offer that same hope and support to others. The road ahead would undoubtedly have its challenges, but with love, compassion, and unwavering determination, the Blackwood family was ready to face whatever came their way, continuing to build their legacy of second chances and transforming lives one family at a time. The Blackwood mansion was abuzz with activity as Emily and Alexander prepared for their meeting with the mayor's office. The dining room table was covered with documents, proposals, and colorful drawings from the girls, their ideas for how to make the citywide initiative more family-friendly. As Emily sorted through the papers, she couldn't help but smile at the contrast between the formal city plans and the crayon-sketched happy home designs from Lily, Rose, and Violet. Somehow, it felt like the perfect representation of their foundation's approach, blending professional expertise with heartfelt compassion. "Are you ready for this?" Alexander asked, entering the room with 2 steaming mugs of coffee. Emily accepted her mug gratefully, inhaling the rich aroma. "As ready as I'll ever be. It's a big step, Alexander. Going from our local projects to a city-wide initiative. It's a little overwhelming." Alexander nodded, understanding in his eyes. "It is. But think of how many more people we can help." And with David's story. David. In the whirlwind of preparing for the mayor's meeting, Emily had been working tirelessly to help her former neighbor. With the foundation's resources, they had managed to prevent David's eviction and were in the process of finding him a more stable living situation. More than that, David had agreed to share his story as part of the foundation's awareness campaign. "Speaking of David," Emily said, glancing at her watch, "he should be here soon. Are you sure about having him join us for the meeting?" Alexander reached out, squeezing her hand reassuringly. "Absolutely. His perspective is invaluable. Who better to speak to the realities of housing insecurity than someone who's lived through it?" As if on cue, Mrs. Hendricks appeared at the doorway. "Mr. Blackwood, Ms. Carson, Mr. Matthews has arrived." David entered the room, looking markedly different from the desperate man who had called Emily just weeks ago. Clean-shaven and dressed in a crisp button-down shirt, he carried himself with a newfound confidence. "Emily, Alexander," he greeted them warmly. "I can't thank you enough for this opportunity." Emily embraced her old friend, still marveling at the twists of fate that had brought them back into each other's lives. "We're the ones who should be thanking you, David. Your willingness to share your story, it's going to make a real difference." As they settled in to review their presentation one last time, the sound of small feet pattering down the hallway caught their attention. The door burst open, and the triplets tumbled in, each clutching a handful of papers. Daddy," Lily exclaimed, slightly out of breath. "We made more drawings for the meeting," Alexander chuckled, scooping up Violet, who had made a beeline for his lap. "That's wonderful, girls. But remember, we talked about this. The meeting with the mayor is for grown-ups." The girls' faces fell, disappointment evident in their eyes. Emily, seeing their crestfallen expressions, had a sudden idea. "You know what?" she said, kneeling down to their level. "Why don't you girls give your drawings to David? He can take them to the meeting and show everyone your ideas." The girls' eyes lit up at this suggestion. They turned to David, suddenly shy in the presence of this new adult. David, for his part, seemed touched by the gesture. He knelt down, accepting the drawings with a warm smile. "I would be honored to present your ideas," he said seriously. "After all, you're the experts on what makes a happy home, aren't you?" As the girls giggled and began explaining their drawings to an attentive David, Emily caught Alexander's eye. The love and pride she saw there mirrored her own feelings. This was what their foundation was all about, not just providing housing, but creating homes, fostering connections, and building a community. The drive to City Hall was filled with a mix of nervous energy and excitement. As they pulled up to the imposing building, Emily took a deep breath, centering herself. "Ready to change the world?" Alexander asked, a hint of playfulness in his voice as he helped her out of the car. Emily smiled, squeezing his hand. "One family at a time," she replied, their shared mantra giving her strength. The meeting itself was a whirlwind of presentations, questions, and discussions. Emily and Alexander laid out their vision for the city-wide initiative, backed by data from their existing projects and projections for future impact. But it was David's testimony that truly captured the room's attention. As he shared his story, from successful professional to the brink of homelessness, Emily could see the impact it was having on the city officials. This wasn't just about numbers and budgets anymore. It was about real people, real lives. And when David pulled out the girls' drawings, explaining how even children understood the importance of creating welcoming spaces for those in need, Emily felt a surge of emotion. This was so much bigger than she had ever imagined when she first accepted Alexander's offer of a job. As the meeting concluded, the mayor herself approached them, her face alight with enthusiasm. "Mr. and Mrs. Blackwood," she began, then caught herself with a smile. "Or should I say, Mr. Blackwood and Ms. Carson? Your proposal is exactly what this city needs. I'm not just talking about the housing initiative, impressive as it is. It's your approach, this blend of professional expertise and genuine compassion. We want to fast-track this project." Emily and Alexander exchanged glances, barely containing their excitement. "There is one condition, though," the mayor continued, her eyes twinkling. "We want you both more involved at the city level. How would you feel about joining our Housing and Community Development Advisory Board?" The offer took them by surprise. It was an incredible opportunity, a chance to influence policy and make an even broader impact. But it would also mean more time away from the girls, more public scrutiny. As if reading her thoughts, Alexander squeezed Emily's hand. "We're honored by the offer," he said to the mayor, "but we'll need to discuss it as a family before we can give you an answer." The mayor nodded approvingly. "Of course, family first. That's what I like to see. Take your time, but not too much time," she added with a wink. "We've got work to do." As they left City Hall, Emily's mind was racing with possibilities. They had come so far, achieved so much, but with this new opportunity came new challenges, new responsibilities. David, sensing her preoccupation, placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You've got this, Emily," he said softly. "Look how far you've come. From where you were to where you are now, you're living proof that second chances work. That's what you're giving to others now." Emily felt tears prick at her eyes, overwhelmed by the journey that had brought her to this point. "Thank you, David," she managed, her voice thick with emotion. As they drove home, Emily's thoughts turned to the girls, to the family dinner that awaited them. They had big news to share, big decisions to make. But looking at Alexander beside her, feeling the warmth of the life they had built together, Emily knew that whatever came next, they would face it as they had faced everything else. Together, as a family. The Blackwood Second Chance Foundation was poised for its next big step, and so it seemed was the Blackwood family itself. As the familiar silhouette of their home came into view, Emily felt a sense of excitement for the future, a future full of possibility, love, and the endless potential of second chances. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm golden glow across the Blackwood estate, Emily stood on the terrace taking in the view. The gardens, once a symbol of opulent isolation, now buzzed with life and purpose. A new wing had been added to the mansion, housing the ever-expanding operations of the Blackwood Second Chance Foundation. 5 years had passed since that pivotal meeting at City Hall, and so much had changed. Yet, as Emily heard the familiar sound of children's laughter floating up from the garden, she was reminded that the most important things had remained beautifully constant. "Penny, for your thoughts?" Alexander's voice came from behind her, followed by the warmth of his arms wrapping around her waist. Emily leaned back into his embrace, a contented smile playing on her lips. "Just marveling at how far we've come," she replied softly. "Do you remember when this terrace felt like it was at the top of the world, so far removed from everything?" Alexander chuckled, the sound rumbling through his chest. "And now it's the heart of everything we do. Who would have thought?" Their quiet moment was interrupted by the excited voices of their girls, no longer little but blossoming into young teenagers. Lily, Rose, and Violet burst onto the terrace, followed by a group of children from the Foundation's latest housing project. "Mom, Dad," Lily called out, her eyes shining with excitement. "Can we show the kids the new community center plans?" "Please?" Emily and Alexander exchanged a glance, sharing a silent moment of pride. The girls had grown into passionate advocates for the Foundation's work, each finding their own way to contribute. "Of course," Alexander replied, ruffling Lily's hair affectionately. "Why don't you take them to the study? The latest blueprints are on my desk." As the children scampered off, Emily turned to face Alexander fully. "They've come so far," she said softly. "Remember when they were afraid I was trying to replace their mother?" Alexander nodded, his eyes misty with emotion. "And now they call you Mom without a second thought. Sophia would be so proud of them. Of all of us." The mention of Sophia no longer brought pain, but a warm remembrance. Her portrait still hung in the main hall, a beloved presence watching over the family she had left behind and the new members who had joined. A gentle cough interrupted their moment. They turned to see Mrs. Hendricks standing in the doorway, a rare smile on her face. "I hate to interrupt, but your guests have arrived." Emily and Alexander shared an excited glance before following Mrs. Hendricks inside. The grand living room, once a showcase of wealth and status, had been transformed into a warm, welcoming space, and today it was filled with familiar faces. David, now the Foundation's outreach director, stood chatting with Sarah Thompson and her family, the first residents of their housing project, now homeowners themselves. The mayor was there too, along with various community leaders and Foundation volunteers. As Emily and Alexander entered, a hush fell over the room. The mayor stepped forward, a wide smile on her face. "Shall we begin?" she asked, her eyes twinkling with barely contained excitement. Alexander nodded, clearing his throat. "Friends, family, colleagues, thank you all for being here today. 5 years ago, we embarked on a journey to change our city, one family at a time. Today, we're here to celebrate a milestone." Emily took over, her voice strong and clear. "Thanks to all of your hard work and support, the Blackwood Second Chance Foundation has officially helped its 1,000th family transition from homelessness to stable housing." The room erupted in cheers and applause. Emily felt tears prick at her eyes as she looked around at the faces of those they'd helped, those who had joined their cause, and the family that had made it all possible. As the celebration continued around them, Emily found a quiet moment with David. "Did you ever imagine we'd end up here?" she asked, thinking back to that desperate phone call that had reconnected them. David shook his head, a look of wonder on his face. "Never in my wildest dreams. You didn't just give me a second chance, Emily. You showed me how to give others a second chance too." The evening wore on, filled with laughter, tears, and countless stories of lives transformed. As things began to wind down, Emily found herself back on the terrace, Alexander by her side, watching the sun set on another day. "You know," Alexander said softly, "when I first hired you, I thought I was offering you a chance to rebuild your life. I never imagined you'd rebuild mine too. Our family, this foundation, it's all because of you." Emily turned to him, her heart full of love. "No," she said, cupping his face gently. "It's because of us. All of us. We did this together." As they stood there, the sounds of their extended family, biological and chosen, drifting out from the house, Emily reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From a chance encounter between a desperate woman and a grieving widower to a family and a foundation built on love, compassion, and the unwavering belief in second chances. Their story wasn't over. There were still challenges to face, lives to change, and a legacy to build. But as Emily looked into Alexander's eyes, feeling the solid ground beneath her feet and the vast open sky above, she knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. For in the end, that was what the Blackwood Second Chance Foundation was truly about. Not just providing housing or resources, but building connections, fostering love, and showing the world that with support, compassion, and an opportunity to start anew, anyone could transform their life. As the last light faded from the sky, Emily and Alexander turned to rejoin their family and friends. They stepped back into the warmth of their home, ready to write the next chapter of their ever-evolving story, a story of love, resilience, and the enduring power of second chances.